Test, test. Hey, good morning again. We're going to start in another 5 minutes, 9:05. So if you need to grab some tacos and coffee, grab some real quick. 9:05. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and kick off. Like anything in the Army, if it's an airborne operation and we set a hard time, it's either early or late. So, hey, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone had a great first day of VERTEX yesterday. Do we have anybody new that wasn't here yesterday in the room? Where are you from, sir? Okay, all right, new in the room. Did anybody get to meet the right people they wanted to meet with? Is there someone yesterday that's from industry that didn't get to meet the right government person or stakeholder that they wanted to have a touch point with? Anybody in the room? So you met the right government folks. If you didn't, I will call them out so you can meet them. Okay, so you should be leaving here with success for your company and your engagement with the right stakeholders here. Again, we're going to have this morning's layout similar to yesterday. We'll have a keynote this morning. We'll have breakout sessions this afternoon, and then the two panels this morning, you're going to be hearing from industry about their experience navigating the DoD systems and their experience working with the Army. So without any further ado, we'll get this kicked off. Let me introduce you to our Deputy Director of Army Application Laboratory, Colonel Clay McVeigh.
Thank you, Sam. So I actually, before I was coming out, I realized I left the page upstairs. So thanks for stalling just a few minutes for me. So good morning and welcome to day 2 of VERTEX Launched Effects. It's great to see familiar faces among our industry partners and Army collaborators. And a special welcome to those joining for the first time. Thank you all for investing your time in this 2-day discussion. And this morning, I'd like to speak a bit to those who are new to defense and may not be quite familiar with the lingo that we use, particularly with respect to the term that we call requirements. So this marks my 7th VERTEX. I've attended sessions focused on robotics, armored formations, contested logistics, the air-ground littoral, tactical information and networks, and advanced autonomy. Before I arrived earlier, VERTEX events tackled other topics such as human performance and operational and tactical energy. As Colonel J.D. Swinney pointed out yesterday, the VERTEX that we're holding here is unique in that we are discussing a topic that has an approved Army requirement, and then there's that word requirement. Okay, on 19 July 2024, so about a year ago, General Rainey, the Commanding General of Army Futures Command, signed what we call an abbreviated capability development document, or an ACDD. He is only one of 3 individuals in the Army who is allowed to sign an Army requirement. And I'd like to take a minute to describe what an ACDD is, why it's important, and what it is intended to do. So there are 5 things that an ACDD does for the Army. First, it identifies a gap. It clearly states what the Army can't do currently, but that it must or it needs to be able to do. Second, it describes the desired capability. It outlines what a new capability should achieve and the effect that it needs to have. It focuses on what is needed and how to achieve it. Third, the ACDD provides a high-level solution. It suggests a general approach to filling the capability gap. Fourth, it establishes initial parameters. It sets some basic boundaries, like rough cost estimates, timelines, and key performance parameters. And then lastly, number 5, it supports Army senior leader decisions. Specifically, it supports what we call milestone decision authority decisions. It provides enough information for decision makers to approve a project moving into the next stage of development. Okay, now that's important. We often talk about what's the requirement. When the government says, I have a requirement, they're talking about that document that has gone through a process and been approved by a senior leader. When industry who's not familiar with that jargon talks about a requirement, they may be talking it on a lowercase r sense, that it's just what is it that you need. So in short, the ACDD is about quickly and effectively documenting the need and getting approval to explore solutions. It's about clarity of need, not specific detailed engineering. Now, this is the point in my remarks where I would love to say something like, please pick up a copy of the approved ACDD for launched effects there in the back. But unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way. While this document is not classified, it does contain controlled information. And we're careful not to discuss in specific terms the exact ranges and effects that we're looking to achieve. We can, however, share in broad terms what it is that we're looking for, and if you stay connected to the broader Army, you can learn what those things are as well. This is what Colonel J.D. Swinney did yesterday and why he brought Lieutenant Colonel Hunter Gray on stage to help him answer some of your questions. Colonel Gray is the product manager for LaunchDevect, and he is the one that will be facilitating that industry collaboration specifically with LaunchDevect. So to stay connected to this program, you have to stay connected to his office. And you can do that by monitoring the Army's request for information, its request for proposals, and its openness to industry days, specifically for LaunchDevect. And those are published on sam.gov, sam.gov. Sam.gov is the official U.S. Army website to do business with the federal government. Admittedly, sam.gov is difficult to navigate, especially for small, non-traditional defense companies. So the Army Applications Laboratory will amplify LaunchDevect solicitations on sam.gov on our social media accounts for your help. Connect with us on LinkedIn, and we'll help get the word out. And we promise that we'll keep our posts focused, relevant, and free of promotional noise. So if we share it, we think it's something that's worth your time. If you reviewed the recent LaunchDevect solicitations that the Army published on sam.gov, around the time that General Rainey signed the ACDD, you would see some of the following characteristics. So I've gone through and kind of summarized what we've already publicly published. So LaunchDevect, and you've heard a lot of this yesterday from Colonel Sweeney's comments, are a family of air, ground, and even maritime launch systems. LaunchDevect's air platforms will operate at high, medium, and low altitudes, and at short, medium, and long ranges. LaunchDevects are designed to operate autonomously or semi-autonomously to deliver their effects. They operate either in solo or as part of coordinated teams. They can operate within both manned, unmanned, and mixed formations. Control of LaunchDevects must be transferred and be able to be transferred between units based on mission needs. Mission capabilities for LaunchDevects include detect, identify, locate, and report using EO, IR, passive RF, and audio means. They deliver lethal and non-lethal effects that include aircraft and ground decoys. They conduct battle damage assessments. They extend ranges of communications. They protect friendly formations. They employ electronic warfare disruptors. They drop unattended ground sensors, and they provide a counter-UAS capability. These payloads must be upgradable and adaptable to emerging threats. These systems are designed to stimulate a threat response to enable dynamic targeting. And then lastly, you would read that LaunchDevects will employ the modular open systems approach. Once the Army understands what it needs to enact LaunchDevects, it will update the ACDD, that requirement, with what it calls an updated CDD, another Army requirement. This is a second, more refined requirements document. Where the ACDD is written at a high level, the updated CDD will be detailed and more comprehensive. Where the ACDD is broad and qualitative, the updated CDD will be specific and measurable. In essence, the updated CDD is more mature, and it is a more refined version of the ACDD, reflecting a deeper understanding of the capability needed and the technologies needed to deliver that. And the way we will get there is with your help. Your participation in VERTEX, by monitoring and responding to LaunchDevect's RFIs and RFPs, directly shapes that updated CDD. Many of the government folks you are interacting with today will ultimately be the ones writing that updated CDD this year and into next. Once that document is ready, our commanding general will convene a council of other Army senior leaders and consider approving that newer, updated document. As our director, Dr. Purley, stated yesterday, AAL will issue an RFP on LaunchDevects in the coming weeks and months as part of that learning campaign. Your participation will help us refine some of those specific and measurable requirements that are now only broadly written and defined. So please stay tuned by monitoring our LinkedIn profile. Your perspectives are invaluable, and we want to make sure they continue to shape where we go next. If something wasn't raised in your breakout room, or it struck you after the fact, we invite you or anyone else for that matter, to scan the QR code on the screen and share your thoughts, okay, directly with our team. Additionally, as Dr. Purley mentioned yesterday, we encourage you to connect with us through our Solver network. You can do that by scanning the second QR code that's on the screen behind me. And we'll make sure that we send out an email by the end of the week that has these two links in it for you. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to hear a bit about how the Army is designing its launched effects from Colonel J.D. Sweeney's keynote remarks. Afterwards, he led a panel of discussion that revealed just how deeply integrated the launch effect requirements have become, thanks to the combined efforts of the Future Vertical Lift, the Long-Range Precision Fires, and the Air and Missile Defense cross-functional teams. Major Drew Roberts, representing the Long-Range Precision Fires CFT, described launched effects as a targeting machine capable of removing our adversary's most valuable chess pieces from the chessboard before the game even begins. He emphasized that every part of the concept ensures we match the right munition to the right target early and precisely. Mr. Ron Niedert from the Air and Missile Defense team offered a sobering strategic insight. If we're conceptualizing launched effects, we should assume our adversaries are doing the same. He underscored the need for formation-based layered defense to shield our units from the emerging threats. And Mr. Dan DiMartino from the DevCom Armament Center highlighted the Army's buy, try, decide cycle and emphasized that industry's input is essential. We need to understand not only what to buy, but in what sequence and how much. In our last panel yesterday morning, Major Chad Evans from the Fire's Capability Development Integration Directorate led a discussion with soldiers who have used some version of launched effects in training, in testing, or in simulation. Captain Chris Chelson from the Joint Readiness Training Center shared that in his experience, drone swarms are more effective when deployed against point targets. And then Chief Greg Lowell, one of the two targeting experts on the panel, noted that the concept is still in its infancy, so much so that even our simulation environments haven't fully incorporated yet into their experimentations. Chief Phil Jones, preparing for hands-on experimentation, discussed the logistical realities of deploying these systems. Units are constrained with space. Some platforms must be treated like live ammunition, and maintaining a full electrical charge adds another layer of complexity. Moving into the afternoon, during the extended range communications breakout session, participants explored innovative approaches to networking launched effects. The team encouraged consideration of both high frequency and millimeter waveforms, HF for low data, long range transmission, and millimeter options to limit propagation. The group also discussed steering antennas and integrated multi-band componentry. The Future Capabilities breakout session sparked a wide-ranging discussion. Industry shared technologies that can provide alternative methods for precision, navigation, and timing for launched effects. In this forum, industry also emphasized that often the government's process to hinder industry's ability to access data, such as target recognition and data repositories. So for this latter point, please let us, the Army Applications Laboratory, help you find the right connections if you feel stuck. If we don't know how to help, we probably know someone who does. In the Flexibility Through Modularity breakout session, we heard common theme from prior VERTEX events. Industry wants to know what the common interface standards are. And essentially, the government should define what the IEEE equivalent standard for launch effects, as well as provide a common software stack. And we will carry this message forward to our senior leaders at Army Futures Command. And as I laid out earlier, it's not just a matter of the government withholding a known standard. The reality is it takes iterations of working together to determine what that common connectivity, power, and data transmittal requirements need to be. Then industry told us that we need to keep our standards open, use commonly available industry standards such as Google protobufs. We also need to ensure that the Army standards need to be common with other DoD organizational standards. Army is so calm, why don't we work together? The Reducing Cost to Achieve Scale breakout session echoed a theme from prior VERTEX events. This session highlighted the need for greater access to test ranges, essentially for non-traditional companies. AAL continues to raise this issue with our senior leaders, with our OSD stakeholders, and during our congressional engagements that often happen upstairs. As our director, Dr. Purley, mentioned yesterday, draft language in the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act suggests that Congress is taking notice and is about to take some measures to help us. This session also spotlighted the importance of helping communities secure safety releases so that soldiers can provide timely and meaningful feedback to companies who are in a rapid development cycle. It is now my distinct honor to introduce Mr. Patrick Mason, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Defense Exports and Cooperation. In this role, Mr. Mason serves as the Army's principal architect of international security assistance and armaments collaboration. He manages a portfolio that encompasses over 150 allied nations and exceeds $15 billion annually in exports and cooperative efforts. Mr. Mason brings with him a distinguished career spanning Army Special Operations, aviation science and technology, and acquisition leadership. From test pilot to program executive, his contributions have shaped the trajectory of Army modernization and cross-national defense integration. His service reflects an unwavering commitment to technical excellence, strategic vision, and global partnership. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Patrick Mason to the stage. Thanks.
All right, I think I turned this thing on. Well, good morning. It is great to be here, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the introduction. I typically, because I come from the Pentagon and sometimes maybe don't have the biggest smile on my face, I always introduce myself as Pat Mason. I'm a grumpy bureaucrat. I'm from the Pentagon, and I'm here to help. So, you know, I know the introduction talked a little bit about my role in DASADEC. You know, the former acquisition executive, whenever we would be traveling around, it's a really long title, and you would say it to soldiers, and they would just look at you and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So the way that I just put it is, I am the Army's arms dealer. And so when you look at everything that we do, and certainly that is a very dynamic business these days. So the Army used to average about $14 billion a year in foreign military sales. This past year, we were up over $45 billion. So in a period of 2 years, we went from $14 billion to $45. We've got about $250 billion in backlog right now of cases that still have to be executed. So undelivered product, if you will, that's out there right now. And so certainly what we see from that is that industry is extremely collaborative in how we work together, because it is a collaboration with industry to make this happen, and it's all based on the demand signals that we're seeing internationally right now. So for today, they really wanted me to focus on the international stuff, which I just talked about, and I will eventually get to that at the end, and I really wanted to open up for some Q&A. But given really the last 6 months, I actually have not been in the international space that much. I served as the acting Army acquisition executive since January until the May timeframe, and then right now I'm actually serving as the acting principal deputy within ASALT. So a little bit of dual hat as we work through the transition in the administration, and we also work through both the nominations and then the confirmation of our political appointees and our leadership that's going to come into ASALT and then across the Army. So with that in mind, I was going to give you a little bit of just what's going on within ASALT and Army acquisition. Certainly, if you've read some of the news articles that came out this morning, they were talking about, you know, PEO reform and requirements reform. And in fact, there is a HASC hearing today that my boss, Jesse Tolleson, who's the acting AE, is at with Mike Duffy, Honorable Mike Duffy, who's the DAE. The HASC is having on acquisition reform, right? And you know, acquisition reform is one of those things, is it's lifetime employment within the Beltway, right? That's all we do is act reform. The question is this an opportunity because we see the compelling reason to shift in the way that we are operating? So I want to cover a little bit of that. I'll talk about launched effects, but I'm not going to get into the details of the program because you had J.D. Sweeney yesterday. You got Hunter sitting over here. They know a lot more than I do, but I really want to talk about the business approach for launched effects. And then lastly, I'll transition into a discussion about the international space and the complexities associated with it. And that hopefully will lead into the FMS panel that is going to go on after this. So as always, you know, I'm going to come out here and speak. And last week I was out in Land Euro, so I was over in Europe and I met with EUCOM, had good discussions with them, and then up to USARAF, General Donahue, and really talking about largely industrial collaboration, attritable systems, regional plans, and how those regional plans align to allies and partners, and how we could work with them in a manner to foster the type of capabilities that are necessary across the spectrum, right? From attritable systems on to some of the higher end capabilities that are there. So the team prepares, talking points for me and everything else. And then as I get back and I'm reading the Wall Street Journal this weekend, if you had read it, the weekend read actually featured somebody from, I'll say, the emerging tech defense ecosystem that talked about the defense tech revolution and talked about the changing in our buying habits and what we're doing. So I read that article and I kind of read through the talking points and I said, okay, I really want to shift what I want to say. And then yesterday I'm on the plane, I'm flying out here, I'm reading the journal again. And there's an article that is called A Sky Full of Killer Robots. And it was talking about what's going on in Ukraine right now. And certainly I had some of those discussions with the Ukrainians last week when I was in Wiesbaden and the way that their industry is moving, what they're facing, and what they need to go do, given the imperative for defense that they have associated with obviously the ability to produce at scale. And so with that, really wanted to take a step back because it really just talks about the confluence of geostrategic realities, the very, very complex and dynamic security environment that we're in right now, the acceleration of technology and how those elements are coming together to really call us to action to change the way that we are doing things. And certainly you see that from Army leaders. And that's really the first point that I'm going to really get into is what Secretary Driscoll has really mandated to us, what he has put out on what we're trying to do. And so when he first came in, and this is a little bit dated from a few months ago, but I think it's still really, really important, is the first thing he said is that the Army needs to be a better customer. We send out conflicting demand signals. We send out conflicting investment signals. We're not necessarily sure of our approach. We may shift that. And so how does that consistently drive investment and drive industry to actually move forward in specific areas? Bureaucratic barriers, no doubt on that, right? And I'll get to some of those in the end. There's a balance there as we do it, but certainly from both the Secretary and the Chief, it is about how we eliminate bureaucratic barriers, outdated systems that hinder us in transforming forward, right? And so we've certainly looked at a lot of those things in the past. I heard safety releases mentioned earlier, but just a simple one that we're attacking in the Army with vigor now is the material release process. And if you've ever dealt with the material release process, you will let out an audible groan on how hard it is, both for software, and it's not built for today's tech ecosystem. It just flat isn't. And so we recognize that, and we've got to do those things, and what we see is a clear manifestation of that moving forward. And then lastly, execute continuous transformation. And that is something that's underway, certainly started with the Army Transformation Initiative, and now moving forward into continuous transformation. But I'll highlight three specific areas that we focus on in ASALT. Lieutenant General Collins, who's a military deputy, Jesse Tolson talks about as well. The first one is, and Clay talked about, is we have to reimagine the way that we do requirements, right? Programs of record that last for decades are no longer valid in many cases. Certainly there are capital-intense systems, right? If you're going to build an LTAMDS radar integrated air missile defense IBCS, those are capital intense. There's not a lot of commerciality associated with those, except in the componentry. And so that requires a consistent approach to doing that and modification for software over time. But on the far end of that, when you get into whether it's small UAS, launched effects, attritable systems, right? How do we do that within a requirement system that Clay talked about is, I call it, you enter the Pachinko machine and you go up and, it's kind of like Candyland and you slide back down again because you went to the Pentagon and your slides weren't correct, and then you go back up again, right? I mean, Hunter's laughing, so he's experienced that beforehand, right? I call it Chutes and Ladders or Candyland, right? Sometimes. You'll be there next week. Okay, Candyland next week, right? And so certainly General Rainey is addressing that characteristic of need, but the cycle time for those just has to increase. And then obviously through AAL and other means is how do we effectively communicate that to industry? But I will tell you is communicating it to industry without a clear budget line that shows a demand signal, that shows opportunity, I don't really know what that does. It's a lot of talk. And certainly we're seeing great amount of private equity coming into the defense market right now. Certainly there is a shift from where we were, say, 5 or 10 years ago associated with it. But we also have to make sure that we somehow indicate enough clarity to industry with a consistent demand buying signal that then prompts investment and allows us to do the things that we want to go do. And so that's the other element that we're talking about. And then the third is really the buying modalities that we have, right? So requirements tend to go to some, I'm not going to say extreme, but some specification. And the reality is, as one of my old bosses when I used to work in the SOCOM area, John Shipley used to say, is good enough, not as good as it needs to be, not as good as it can be. We're going to iterate on it over time. And so it's really the way that the chief talks about it, and he talked about it last week, General George, was how do we adopt first? So what is the commercial technology? What is industry invested in? I'm not talking about COTS, it could be a non-developmental item. And how do we simply adopt that? We buy that. Our buying modality is to go out and buy it, put it in a formation, and then much like we see with transformation and contact and tick formations, iterate on that, allow units to understand how to properly employ that, and then move forward from that, potentially with a modification program, right? So number one is adopt, number two is modify. So why would you modify? Well, let's just take a look at battery power and battery life in cold weather operations. If it's a commercial application, I'm going to put a heating blanket on it. I'm going to do something else. If I live in Alaska, I plug my car in, I go to a heated garage. Soldier doesn't have that opportunity. And so that's where there actually is great opportunity with our international partners as well, right? We live in the cold, but it ain't cold compared to Norway or Sweden, right? So what are the Nordics doing in that? What are other countries doing in that where we can leverage the chemistry that they're working on such that we can get the battery life that we need? And then how do we influence that as we look to modify things? And then the last element is developmental programs, right? Those big developmental programs. I mentioned integrated air missile defense, FLRAA, future long-range assault aircraft, another one. Massively capital-intensive systems. The amount of capital that you need up front to put that, you've got to have government backing behind that. And so that's the approach that we've really talked about in ASALT as we move forward. You know, how do we become a better buyer, right, or a better customer, if you will, right? How do we take down some of these bureaucratic barriers that we've wanted to go after for years? And then continuous transformation, but then requirements, the right demand signals, procurement lines, right? Beefy procurement lines that show opportunity. And that's why when we talk about flexible funding, we have to figure out the intersection between congressional oversight, because there is a mandate that they oversee what we spend on, but also send a clear transparency as much as we can to industry to signal what we're going to go buy, and then flexibility in how we go buy it, particularly within the launched effects space, and then like counter UAS is just two examples, and uncrewed systems. All right, so I know they're going to 9:45, so I'm going to accelerate a little bit on the next two topics. But really just wanted to talk briefly about launched effects. So I was at the PEO when we started launched effects, and it was like 2019. Significant work in the S&T side of the house. In fact, Alan Walker and I were reminiscing a little while ago, right, when we were working together on this. And the biggest challenge in launched effects as the S&T community was working on this was we wanted to spur industry to get engaged in this space. So we wanted to put enough capital up front that it would drive companies to move into this sector. We knew the tech would come. And so to me, it was never about the technology. It was always about the business model that had to follow up for launched effects. How do we implement a business model that is fundamentally different than the way that you typically procure within large aviation platforms, or even within our UAS systems, where we buy Gray Eagle for decades, we buy Shadow for decades, right? We buy, and then they become huge fleets that are out there. How do you change that when you actually want to move into tranche buying and you want to iterate very quickly on this? And then what is the business model associated with it as well, where it's no longer about the platform and fully integrated? The air vehicle becomes somewhat of a commodity, or the body becomes a commodity. What type of engine do you need? Who are the best engine manufacturers? Who are the best payload manufacturers? Who are the best folks for comm nav that you need in there, particularly in denied environments? And so then it becomes where you have component specialists and then integrators that can bring this together. And then how do you do that when, quite honestly, the government has never demonstrated we're a good systems integrator, right? So how do you bring in a systems integration piece of it, and then how do you spur that and the partnerships that are associated with that? And so, you know, as we looked at that and we were trying to figure out how to iterate on that, I will tell you a lot of, you know, 2 steps forward, almost 2 steps back as we tried to move forward in this space. And as we tried to craft how we would work with industry in this manner. And ultimately, I was always trying to figure out is how do you fundamentally close the business case for industry, right? How do you show where there can be sufficient cash flow and margins that will drive continued investment in this space, and then produce what we want at the end, and then be able to iterate very quickly. This was all pre-Ukraine. So we're sitting around having these discussions before Russia invaded Ukraine, and we really were unaware of how fast things were going to change when you look at what's been going on in Ukraine and the fact that they've demonstrated how attritable systems work at scale. They've demonstrated the cost imbalance can be a strategic advantage. So when you take a look at the cost of the systems that are being built, the cost per kill, and then you look at what we fire against things, you clearly see the value of that, and then you see a rapid innovation model that's associated with it as well, right? They are adopting and modifying on the fly continuously at the brigade level, right? And I know you guys have already heard this, but I'm just providing a little context of how we started this, and then as Ukraine comes and we're taking lessons learned out of it. And so then the question is, okay, well, what do we do from that, and how do we move forward from it? Particularly given the fact that we have to ensure interoperability with our allies and partners, which means we need some minimum standards, right? We don't want to make it too tight. We don't want to make it so binding that the government doesn't allow innovation. But how do we make sure that we have a set of standards, APIs, minimally layered, absolutely minimally layered, that then drive to what we want to do, especially if you have this somewhat component approach that is out there. So with that, I will tell you the one thing that you do see in Ukraine is a clear demand signal and a compelling need. No doubt, right? A clear demand signal. And I would question as to whether or not we still in launched effects, right? Great work going on by the team, but whether or not we're really demonstrating a clear demand signal out there with the procurement lines that will drive us forward such that we can build this ecosystem and then it continues to spur investment and then continues to evolve as we move over time. I also think that there's a lot of questions that we still need to ask, right? I talked earlier about how do you generate sufficient cash flow given the different business model, how you drive margins within your business, because at the end, we're capitalists, right? So that's important, and we recognize that. What does scale really mean in this? Because I understand if I want to build Hellfire or Jaga missiles and I want to stick them in inventory so that I have a total munitions requirement. But how does launched effects fit into your total munitions requirement? How do you use the mix of munitions that are there? And then what happens if I build inventory given the cycle of this technology, right? The movement of this technology is such that you don't want inventory in certain areas because it will be obsolete within a year or so. And so how do we effectively do that? And then I talked earlier about the key interfaces. But I'll go back again to, it is to me about where we find the money, and the money that continues to spur what we've seen from private equity and venture capital, because we start to buy things, put them out in the field, and then that drives the ecosystem, if you will. So with that, and talking about money, I will get into the international side of the house, right? And the reason I say money is because NATO has made a commitment to go to 5%. And I'll just focus on NATO right now, but across the globe, we've seen GDP increases for defense. Out of that 5%, NATO is looking at what they need to spend on, right? And if they want to go buy a high-end munition that's out there, say Gimlers or something like that, that is both an expensive proposition and it is not a timely proposition, just given the timelines for production right now. And so what we have been doing is working closely with our allies and partners to look at what those both regionally and globally demand signals are and how we can align some of the, I will say, requirements or what we're looking for so that internationally we can solicit for, if you will, a common demand signal, right? A demand signal that helps us grow markets at scale, both in the US and internationally, and then gives us that scalability that we need. And I will tell you, one of the countries that we're taking a great lead from is the United Kingdom, right? So the UK and DES, who is their acquisition folks over there, given the work that they've done in Ukraine and what they've done to send out demand signals and the capital that they put into it, the money that they put into it, we have taken a lot of lessons learned from them on how to effectively do this and then looking for those partnerships. And certainly we see great opportunity there because there is no doubt, as I said, as Europe goes to 5%, as NATO goes to 5%, and then they look at what they want to go buy, they need a mix of different capabilities, and we feel that launched effects is in that perfect spot to go do it. It has a great price point associated with it. You can accelerate the delivery of those so you can have capability not in years and years, but in a year, in 18 months, in 2 years. And then we've got to ensure that we've got the right interoperability such that formations across international lines, the UK, the US, other countries can operate together successfully. So with that, I'm at 9:38. I'll just end with three things that I try to always focus on when I'm talking to our allies and partners, and then I'll open it up for questions as we navigate through this, the conversation on wherever you'd like to take it. But, the first is, as bigger ASALT, as we look at what we need to go do right now and what, OSD has really said. I mean, the first one is meeting the commitments on what we're producing right now and expanding production. Certainly, there are supply chain constraints and production limitations that have limited our ability to produce at the scale we need to, given the consumption both in Ukraine and the global demand. And these are some of the traditional systems that we still need out there that provide both offensive and defensive fires. The second is, how do we look to repurpose and combine old legacy systems to make new capabilities that move us forward, right? So we already have production lines, we already have money in play. A very, very simple answer or a simple example is counter UAS. A 30 millimeter with a prox fuse with a very inexpensive radar associated with it is actually an effective counter UAS solution. We've seen that and demonstrated that, and none of that is really new. It was all existing. It was just put together with the right software integration, the right integration, and now we've got a capability, and that's been demonstrated in Ukraine as well. And then lastly, what are the partnerships that are necessary to drive innovation at scale? For launch defects to work effectively, this has to be done at scale. It is not onesie-twosies that are out there unless you're working in a very strategic environment, going for a high-value target that's out there. And so what does scale mean, and what are the partnerships that are necessary to go do that? Certainly, we've seen industry partner internationally so far, so it gives them access to those markets, but it also, for innovative firms, gives them production capacity and the ability to scale. And so that is one of the things that we're also trying to work from my international cooperation space. So FMS is a piece, but FMS is just one modality. There's direct commercial sale, there's licensing, and then how do we help foster partnerships globally that help us achieve our common objectives that we have. So with that, I know went through it relatively quickly on those three things. We do have some time for questions, if that's okay, and we can open it up.
Hey there, thank you for the informative talk. Joe McDonald, CEO and Principal at Jump Seat Research. We do human factors and human-machine integration work. You talked a lot about Army adoption and the requirement purchase side. We're seeing a lot at TICS is more on the soldier adoption side as well. So looking at things like airworthiness reviews for new capabilities, new ordinances that are strapped to these drones that have to be passed before they can actually use these capabilities at the edge. So wondering any thoughts on that, potentially opening up those channels so that they can continue to adopt these things and not have a kit that sits on the shelf so that they can continue purchasing these long term.
Yeah, and I'm going to repeat the question just a little bit because it really talks about how do you actually navigate through whether it's airworthiness or safety releases for some of these capabilities so that you can get them out to soldiers and be able to more expeditiously get them into TIC or someplace else, right? Is that?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something that we've dealt with over the years. I hate to give you a non-answer, but I am sufficiently extracted from that now, although that used to be my life. What I will tell you is there is a great focus on that right now. And I think one of the great successes that we had was actually in the software material release process, which beforehand on some of our systems, we would have a new software drop, but it would be 18 months to get it in the field. And now, because of the process changes that were done with it, that still ensure the safety associated with it, we have been able to accelerate that and do that in a much, much faster manner. And so this is one of the areas where the new technologies, the new asks that are out there challenges the enterprise. But I will tell you, there is a focus on that right now to actually break this down and really, what I will say is how many organizations have a vote and which are the votes that really you need to count, right? Because it's about just the safety so that, if you've got a live warhead that's out there, you've got to have safety in that. But what are the other things that we don't need to worry about right now that get integrated in these reviews?
Thank you.
So.
Mr. Secretary, question on ITAR. Martin Ruffard applies signals intelligence. We make a sensor, which is on the USML. When we want to engage internationally, which we think is important as you look at this pivot to venture-driven, technology-driven, innovation-driven. We have to go through a very rigorous process to be able to engage. We need a DOPSR review for documents that we would share with partners broadly. We need a TAA to begin exchanging technical information. We need a DSP-5 to send them the technical information. We then need to go get a DSP-73 to do a field trial. After the field trial, we come back, we have to do another set of TAAs with end customers. We have to do DSP-73 for permanent exportation. You can see it's quite the process,
Yeah.
and very burdensome for the end customer. This creates a problem, I think, for U.S. innovation and DoD. For example, when I'm private sector, if I go to Cisco and the product manager at Cisco isn't interested in what I'm doing, I can go to any other vendor. I can go to Juniper, Huawei, that's a fun one here. The product manager that makes the wrong decision has a significant disincentive if I'm doing innovation. They've missed, you shopped it to them, they didn't take it, they're now out of luck. So what can we do to streamline, lighten that burden? I mean, that's a handful of things to go learn,
Sure.
especially for your small innovator. Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. So I didn't cover that in here because I knew somebody was going to ask me ITAR, right? Yeah. It's like plant the question because you know somebody's going to ask it because it's everybody's frustration. I mean, everything that you said, right? Whether it's a TAA or I need to get a DSP-5 or I got to go for a 73, all of those things. We have an element within DASADEC that does that on behalf of the Army and looks to people who have systems that kind of loosely fall within the Army, so how we can help them navigate up through that. That is part of the executive order for FMS reform. Part of that is ITAR reform. ITAR, I think, as you know, is covered by statutes, so that is law that is out there right now. And so there have been suggestions and there have been recommendations that have gone through. We've done this over the years, right? FMS reform is like ACT reform, right? We've done like 15 over the last 15 years. But I think that there is an opportunity for some legislative change that will give us greater, I'll say flexibility. It will ensure the appropriate oversight so that sensitive technologies, those sensitive technologies that we absolutely need to control are maintained while we have greater flexibility. And this is really coming to bear too in how we've designated a lot of things as dual use technologies in commercial, which really takes it over to commerce's lane and takes it out of the DoD and the state lane. Because it really, to navigate through this, you got to go through Department of Defense, you got to go through Department of State, and then you've got commerce. And as we push more into the commercial side of the house, it really opens that up. But then we've also taken a lot of things where we are updating the FMS only list and taking things off of that then will allow greater flexibility.
May I follow?
Sure.
The FMS process puts government in the position of screening and as a gatekeeper. When we do FMS, it's actually government coming to us with a request for something. When we do direct outreach, it's very much innovation-based on problems that they're seeing and really expand the scope. And so we're looking for an ability, at least with EU or Five Eyes, to maybe do a one-time process where we do an element of self-policing, and it reduces the burden for customer, at least for customer engagement on the other side. I actually have to name everybody that we're going to shop to or that we're going to do an evaluation with by name. It's a huge headache. It's not a headache, it's a disincentive for Europeans to work with us, and they have some significant budgets now.
Yeah, they do. And certainly I appreciate those comments, and I will take that back, right? And I'll talk to, I don't know if you know who Mike Vaccaro is, but Mike is the guy in the Department of State who is Mr. Exports. He's Mr. ITAR.
Thank you, sir.
So I'll talk, I will bring it back up to Mike and get an update on where we are, so. All right.
Hi.
Okay.
Jonathan Josephson, the Quantum Interface. So I'd like to follow up with his question. So we're starting to work with FMS. We have support with SAP HQ, Secretary of the Army. We talked with Matthew Whitaker. He says, my job is to push U.S. economies into foreign markets with NATO. But we really want, as a small business, we really want the help to know who does the U.S. want us to work with first. we want that guidance not to just go shotgun, but to start off with the support of the U.S. and understanding what's going to help us the most. Where do we get that?
So what sector are you in right now? What's your product or?
It's training, operational support, and then also universal controls.
Okay, so universal controls, and I think I'm going to just repeat it again. You know, where you get that demand signal of what's coming in, so that you understand. I'll say the demand signals are priorities for foreign military sales and the allies and partners that we would like to see you work with, right? Is that the question?
It's more that we've talked with several countries.
Yeah.
The closest that we've come is, we work primarily with the Air Force, but the closest that we've come is going to Shepherd and then talking with the training for the NATO pilots.
Sure.
And then we get direct contact with U.S. guidance in that particular area for the training sector. But in terms of, we don't understand the branches as a whole, the DoD as a whole, and what's going to support our mission the most with a particular ally or working with somebody. When we talk directly with the companies, it's like, we want this now. Mm-hmm. Well, we still don't know how to do that. We're learning how to do that. But that's where I'd like to be able to come to you or to the Defense Department and say, do you want us working with them first, or do you want us working with them first?
Okay. So I'm going to give you an answer you probably don't want to hear, which is we're actually, yeah, well, it depends. We're not actually going to get in the middle if there is a business-to-business relationship that's going on. But there is something that is governmental, where there's a governmental signal that's going on, and they've indicated that there is FMS or that they're interested in some kind of government-to-government relationship. We'll actually weigh in on that. We do have some forums for what I'll largely say is, we call it the Army Security Assistance Enterprise. We're doing one in Huntsville right actually before the Labor Day weekend. It's on a Wednesday there. And I'll be there with our USASAC CG, who's Brigadier General Alan Pepper, and we essentially go over where we believe the opportunities are out there right now. But we also talk about how do you go about curating business opportunities with allies and partners, right? And what you can go do. I will tell you, if you're new to this space and you're a small business, I won't lie, it is monumentally difficult to try to get a laydown of the international landscape and then also understand all of the rules, as we talked about earlier, to navigate through that to go do it. I mean, it's extremely difficult to go do it. And quite honestly, people in industry, that is their specialty, right? And those are a lot of the folks that I end up talking to a lot, because they are so savvy. They understand every single nuance of it, but they also have, let's say, the international contacts within, say, the NATO defense investments, where it really prioritizes what NATO is trying to do from a defense investment perspective, and it also shows what some of their priorities as well. Because they do put out those types of demand signals to really showcase what they want to go do. So, all right, I know we're, you guys just tell me when I'm done and pull me off the stage, right?
Buck Clemens with Tachyon. I kind of have the opposite of the FMS problem, and that is Tachyon is a U.S. company with a foreign national as a CEO, and it's created problems with being able to get into consortiums like AMTC and things like that. Is there anything that DA can do to alleviate that problem or open up more opportunities?
Yeah, so certainly we could have the discussion, and I will tell you that unless my memory is incorrect, those limitations are rooted in statute. So those are law in the way that you have to have separation within that to work within certain spaces. And so unless Congress decides to act on something like that, those are, that's a manifestation of the rule sets that have been put forward. So not the answer you necessarily want to hear, but it's the reality of where that comes from.
Hi, Chris Jet. With Zone 5, we make cruise missiles, low-cost cruise missiles and counter-UAS interceptors. First, I really appreciate your comments. They were some of the clearest layout of some of the issues I've heard. Something I hear a lot about is how we have to be more like tech. And as somebody with tech and automotive background, I think we actually, in a lot of these cases, aren't doing anything technological. We're making missiles that are way less complicated than a Ford Focus. And even though they're a tenth the cost of current missiles, they're still 3 times the cost of a Ford Focus, and they don't need to be. And I think there's 2 big things we could see. One of the things we get is like, well, can you scale this? And every one of our suppliers has the exact same answer, which is give us 6 to 9 months and we can give you any quantity you want. And when you build an automobile, you don't build 10 and then 500 and then 2,000 with a customer that's like, maybe I want it, maybe I don't. You say, I'm going to hit a production target of 20,000 a year, and you commit to it. And I haven't seen that commitment on the government side. And some of that comes from a willingness to burn rounds. We just need to be willing to burn rounds, I think. And we'll learn a lot by burning those rounds because we'll run systems against each other. But those 2 things, I think, lead time and ability to just burn the rounds.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I'll just commiserate with you a little bit, right? So we'll have a little therapy session here. I agree. I mean, there is a fundamental lack of understanding of the lead time that it takes to scale. And that's why within like the launched effects space, because if you have to scale really rapidly, but you're really not talking about a couple of producers, you're talking about producers that could be potentially globally. And so how could you do that and scale, and what are the lead times associated with it, and what are the materials that you actually have to have in inventory, and the rest of it can be just in time, right? Because I can do certain things, software, certain arrays that I need, but if I need a brushless motor, they don't change that often. And they're going to take me a while to build, so I need to have those in inventory, right, so that I can scale. But yeah, that's part of the Secretary's comment on we need to be a better customer, a better buyer is, it's like our munitions buying habit is we reach tamer and then we just drop off, right? So we go buy all of these things, and then we look back at industry and say, okay, that's it, we're not going to buy anymore. And so you've facilitized, you've invested, and then you have this completely inconsistent demand signal that goes on as far as how we buy, right? And so now we're in this massive surge, and it's the article's written right now. We've capacitized for 1 million rounds a year. We're building capacity to do 1 million rounds of 155 per year. My question is, how much are we actually going to buy, right? Industry could build a 1 million rounds, but are we going to buy 1 million rounds? What are we really going to buy? And then how does that sustain the industrial base that we've just built? Because at some point, we may need that 1 million round capacity, but how much of that is going to atrophy over time, which is where we were 2 years ago. So hence, okay, the therapy session is now complete. Thank you very much.
Hello, Mr. Mason. Steve Stillwell, DEFCON Admic.
Been a long time, Steve. Good to see you again.
Yes, it has, sir. Completely off the FMS topic, but sort of something in the launch effect space. The SecDef's memo that came out really helps a lot with trying to speed things up. However, I do have a question, and maybe you can help. Airworthiness was brought up earlier. There's been exceptions for Group 1 and Group 2, but they're quads. Rotorcraft, launched effects doesn't necessarily fall in that space. It's in a really weird place because it's a Group 2 or it's a Group 3, depending on the range. Is there any indication that DA is going to try to carve out some space to make it so that we can speed things up? Because launched effects is one of those areas where we can iterate very quickly, but the processors are holding us back, especially with companies being able to bring in new technologies, insert it, and go test it, and we can get it in the hands of the soldiers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. I was going to go back because you were saying the SecDef's memo. I was like, there's been a lot of them. Which one you talking about?
The one that talks about
The-
EPA compliance and
Yeah, the UAS memo, right, that did that, yeah. I mean, I think that's the first step, and I think this is part of the ongoing, I'm going to say analysis, but just the ongoing looking at how we do these things and how we open it up, because we certainly have to adapt the way that we do that qualification for it. And then the debate that's going on right now is, okay, is it a lethal munition, or is it a decoy? Is it EOIR? Is it some type of let's say jamming capability? Because each one of those is a little bit different. That's largely driven by the payload as well, right? And so if you can just essentially, I'm going to say qualify, but I don't mean qualify in the classic airworthiness sense. If you can qualify just the operation of, I'll say, the air vehicle, then just take a look at it as, okay, what are the payload effects that I have out there? and then how do I want to handle that, right? I mean, we know how to do that for munitions pretty quickly in reality, right? To go out there and get it certified so that it can go shoot. But I mean, it's a good question, and I'm sure it's something that Hunter Gray and his team is going to solve. So, all right.
Thanks for being here. Robert Douthat, former Army officer, requirements officer, 20 years ago, Mr. Shepard, great guy. For the audience, and as my benefit as well, where do you think from the multiple memos from the SecDef's made, and maybe what Congress is doing that will simplify the process? Just, maybe make it a little more, I get so emotional when I talk about it. Accelerate the process. The number of problems, number of challenges in the international arena, and just be a better customer. What do you think the biggest, from your perspective, your seat, the biggest opportunities that the SecDef or Congress is going to present here in the next, say, 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, so certainly you've got 2 pieces of legislation that are out there right now. If you haven't seen the Forge Act, so the Forge Act was put out by the Senate, and then you've got the SPEED Act that is out there as well. SPEED is an acronym. We're really focused on the speed aspect of it as well. I mean, what I will tell you is that, all of the press and everything else, I can give you lots of examples that never make the headlines of where we've actually moved really quickly. But it comes down to the fundamentals, and I'll use Mr. Shipley again, of the 3 things that you needed to go do that, right? Which are the acquisition things of, you've got to have the requirement, the funding, and then the programmatics associated with it. But what I will tell you is I believe, and I've said this, so when I was the acting AE, I gave a speech in March, and I said, I think we have all the authorities we need right now, right? The number 1 thing is culture, right? The culture to move and the culture to understand that we're just ready to go move. But the other thing that we really need within that is the speed of decision-making associated with it. And so one of the aspects I talked about in SOCOM is the reason that we often moved fast is that I walked from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor, walked into his office. He was the milestone decision authority, and then I walked out with a decision, and I walked next door to the contracting officer, and Ann and I sat down and hashed out how we're going to do it. And we had the money parked because SOCOM had parked it and was protecting it so that we could move and move quickly. At scale, that's a lot harder because the decisions are a lot bigger when you're talking about billions of dollars associated with it that you have. So there is going to be some degree of, I'll say, the analysis and the due diligence that is done with that. But I mean, to me, that is the biggest piece. I have said beforehand publicly, and I'll say it again, is, I said the Candyland thing, but I mean, good God, the Council of Colonels to the 1-star review, to the 2-star review, to the 3-star review, to get to the 4-star, that's not actually what he wanted, so we start all over again, right? And you've been there. We've all been there beforehand, right? And to me, that is the area that when you want to move quickly, you've got to address that process and ensure the balance between due diligence and the speed necessary to act, move, and drive outcomes.
But you're confident we're moving in that direction quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I am confident that we're moving in that. I mean, I think everybody's gotten, quote unquote, the memo and understands that. It's a big organization, right? It's just, when you look at just DOD as a whole, but from Honorable Duffy all the way down, it is, and it's going to take time to get it to move. The key is, again, to me, is there are sectors where you should and can move very quickly, and launched effects is one of them. And it needs to go into that far left bin of adopt, modify, iterate as fast as you possibly can, but we've got to put enough money in there and have the right demand signal. And then on the far side, there's some really complex things we do that model doesn't necessarily fit, and the time frame is appropriate for what we're doing, right? Building the next generation assault aircraft tilt rotor, it's going to take a little longer, right? So,
Ladies and gentlemen, please give our keynote speaker a round of applause.
all right, thank you.
We'll be back at 10:15 for our first panel this morning.
Thanks very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you for getting out, making it out.
Oh, no. It's great to be here, and it's great to travel within the United States. This is a rarity. Okay, sure.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we got about 60 seconds before we kick off this next panel. If we can start making our way to our seats. All right, we're about to start the next panel. We're going to head to our seats. We got a lot up here open in the front. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our first panel this morning, we're going to be talking about foreign military exports and imports and these companies that are navigating it. Our moderator for this first panel is Mark Cervantes, CEO of QBranch. And then we're going to have Lagia Zaruto from Beyond Identity and Colonel Tosh Lancaster from US SOCOM. Please welcome them to the stage.
Howdy.
Good morning.
All right, welcome to Texas. Before we kind of get started, I just kind of want to gauge the audience. I'm going to ask you guys some questions. Want to know who's in the room. First question is, who's here? Who's a user? Who's from the user community? Military, civilian. All right. Who's here from industry? Okay, how many investors do we have in the crowd? Awesome. Now here's something for you guys. Who is here from the Department of State? Crickets. Oh, thank you. Who's here from the Department of Commerce? Interesting. When we talk about foreign military sales and working with our allied partners, those are two pillars of the activity that are absolutely critical. Is that me?
I think it's your beard.
My beard? Sorry.
Just gonna go.
Let's go straight to Mike. All right, how's that? Okay.
It's beardless.
Okay. So today, if you read the description, we were going to be talking about foreign military sales, and one of the things that was an extract was that we're going to give away the Jedi arts, and you're going to be able to get some magistry on how things were done in the description. You're not going to get that here today. I'll just tell you that. If you want, maybe we can talk about it afterwards, but what you are going to hear today are from those that are in this space and in this industry. I'm Mark Cervantes. I am the CEO of QBranch. QBranch is a global dual-use business accelerator, and we're a defense firm at that. And when we talk about dual use, it means government, not just DoD, but all of government and the commercial sector. My background is I spent 23 years in the military. I'm a second generation acquisition professional. And where I cut my teeth in this space was when I was the PM for soft lethality down at the United States Special Operations Command in Tampa. So I'm going to ask my panelists to give their introduction, but we've assembled a good group of panelists that I think is going to touch on not just the activity, but even more so kind of all-inclusive of what it really will take to apply, whether it be launched effects or really this critical capability going forward, working with allied partners. So with that, Lygia.
Thanks, Mark. Hey, I'm Lygia Zaruto. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm the head of government, aerospace and defense, and international expansion. That's sort of two ends of the spectrum at Beyond Identity. Beyond Identity is a cybersecurity company that has an identity security platform, and always happy to talk more about that later. I'm a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, military intelligence officer, came from Virginia and Maryland agency organizations, and grew up in tip-fid units. Went to Ranger School. It didn't fare well for me. I didn't graduate, but that's a little bit about my tactical history. And I think for today, I'll be talking largely about cybersecurity and transacting with foreign governments and foreign militaries, because I do a lot of that and do a lot of that present day. I'm coming off of a multi-week trip in Asia, Europe, and Mexico. So these are topics I'd like to breach today, and certainly invite questions as we go.
Yeah, she just, before this panel, got a call from the UK. So this isn't live that she's getting all this action. So with that, I want to turn over to my battle buddy there, Tosh, please.
Hey, Tosh Lancaster. I followed Mark, actually, met him because he was my predecessor as a program manager for soft lethality down in SOCOM. My background is I grew up being an infantry officer, special forces officer, got into acquisitions, managed programs up at Program Executive Office, Ground Combat Systems, Bradleys, MVs, Strikers as well. Then I went back to the SOCOM community, did some special programs for them as an APM. Then I went to do training with industry, worked with Samsung for a year, well, half a year, and then went back down to take over for Mark. Currently, I am the branch chief for prototype and experimentation for U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. I just been colonel, so I'm still wondering what I'm going to do when I grow up, still active duty. So,
Spoiler alert, see him afterwards. Great talent. Thanks, Tosh. You know, just to kind of kick things off, I have an opening statement, but I think we're all aware of what's going on in the geopolitical space. We are all aware of, is that me? We are all aware of, you know, the resurgence at a global scale in spending money to defend their own parts of the world. And that is an opportunity for us when we talk about foreign military sales, especially for innovation collaboration. I think, you know, there was Diana Fund, right, which is a defense accelerator. You know, one of the stats that I had seen was $8 billion by 2023, they're going to have that money. And if you break that down, that's a lot of money, even per day. I mean, we're talking about $190,000 per day to be spent on this across 23 nations. And that's important to us. You know, we heard the DASA deck talk about standards. We need to be able to be inclusive of these partner nations and understanding what we're doing, because there's a significant amount of opportunity. And with that, you know, with Tosh's experience, we've done that firsthand in the special operations community. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Tosh and ask him the first question, because I think it's good for us to kind of get a use case from which we can kind of talk about. So Tosh, you know, if you could elaborate on, again, your background and what we did at Soft Lethality, but what defines kind of the exportability of what we did, which gave us the lethal advantage, and what you saw and what you've kind of continued in that role?
okay. So I think maybe what you're asking is retaining an advantage, a U.S. advantage, while being able to export capability. Is that what we're talking about? Okay. So I think that. So being able to retain an advantage, it drops back to something Mr. Mason said earlier. A lot of what we can export falls back to statute. So, for example, when the presidential directives, oh, there we go. I lost my good luck charm.
Oh, no. There we go.
So when the presidential directives came down for the Ukraine, right, and we were trying to export as much capability as possible, we hit a roadblock in being able to export some of the capability that we don't even use much anymore with night vision, right? So there is a certain FOM that we want export above. So a FOM being a figure of merit is basically the clarity of your night vision goggles. So we aren't allowed to, at the time, we weren't allowed to export anything over 1600 FOM. Now we've advanced well beyond that, and we know that our partners have advanced well beyond that as well. But so you have some pretty, I wouldn't say archaic, but pretty old laws that haven't changed that prevent us from being able to help out our allies in times of need. And we couldn't even get an exception to that when we were working on it. And I would say it depends on system to system, right? It depends on what the law says. So with night vision, it was clear cut. You can't export anything above this level. If you're talking about some newer systems, there may not be a law in it, and it's going to have to go. As a program manager, you send that up for review, and those decisions are made up at the level Mr. Mason was talking about earlier.
You know, when we were there in SOCOM, we worked with one specific nation in importing. So if you want to talk about that country and that level of activity and what we had to kind of navigate to bring the capability in, Israel.
Yeah. So Israel is a special case, right? And to be able to import, there's a lot of nations who have international agreements with the U.S. And if you don't have one, well, you're out of the game. So I guess the first thing when somebody asks me about international acquisitions, getting into the U.S. market from outside the U.S., it's the first thing I say is, hey, first of all, because of the Buy American Act and because the way the intent behind it, you have to be able to offer something that's either unique, something we don't have, or something that maybe we have and yours is a little bit better and a lot cheaper. Otherwise, I'm as a program manager, I'm not interested at all. I don't even really want to talk to you about it. However, if you do meet one of those criteria, the next step is, do you have an international agreement with the United States? And those are very clear cut as well. You can look them up on the internet quite easily. So Israel being a special case where we do have international agreements, parity of trade with them on defense tech, and the United States invests a lot in the Israeli defense sector. So it made it a lot easier for us. Now, there are some things I'll talk about later with the Israelis being able to export tech to them that we hit a lot of snags. We hit a lot of problems.
Yeah, just looking at the ability to navigate the terrain, it requires, statutes, policies, directives, and what moves at speed is the cyber environment because it's happening in real time. So, Laji, I was wondering if you could talk more about what you've seen and encountered when it comes to the holistic activity of making these partner nations work together.
Yeah, thank you. And as a cybersecurity vendor, I probably fall more in the in-between part of the title of this panel, which is imports, exports, and in-between, because largely cybersecurity solutions, especially SaaS, are not considered defense material. It doesn't mean that we don't adhere to our trade regulations and different authorities, but we don't operate with the same handcuffs per se, that maybe a manufacturer of a drone or manufacturer of a ship like Huntington Ingalls, for instance, would. I failed to mention before, in my background, I ran all of the technology sales at Amazon Web Services globally for public sector. So that's inclusive of defense, education, and governments. And so the approach has been the following. Most nations, where they have formal agreements or not, are begging for some sort of advisory or guidance from the United States, and then the UK and Australia. It's usually those three. I think in offsets, Israel probably falls into that category as well. And if they can't get it proper from our departments and agencies, then they run to industry. And so you have companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft. These are best of breed names, Oracle. If I left out your favorite cloud service provider, forgive me. But they come to these megawatt brands and ask for training as well. And these vendors are more than happy to bring these nation states and their workforce up to speed on how you think about cyber defense, how you think about training models, how you think about defending your network, frankly, especially cloud security. The second piece I would say to that is there's so many coalitions all over the world. I think the one that's being talked about most frequently in contemporary times is, of course, NATO. And when you think about cyber exercises, I don't know if anybody in the room has had the pleasure of participating. If you put your hand up, we can commiserate later, because they're enormous events that are multi-phased and take so much coordination. But NATO, just this month, had an extraordinary exercise, Locked Shields. It's got 4,000 different participants. This is everyone from scientists to procurement officers to policy advisors, and then my favorite, on-net operators and your traditional network analysts. And it was an exercise that had 8,000 endpoints, globally distributed. It mimicked, if you look at the scenarios, it mimicked something that looks like a nation-state attack on critical infrastructure. I think this is one of the reasons why cybersecurity many times is not considered defense material, because when you consider critical infrastructure, every sovereign nation has the right to have access to water and energy sources. So I've combined a couple ideas there, but I think the answer is the way they're approaching it is they're asking for help first, and when they can't get it direct, they go right to industry. Industry's more than happy to help.
Can you elaborate on what nations you're interfacing with that are wanting to get into the game?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of global security work in the commercial sector, and I was sharing with Tosh before this, I may not have a security clearance again in my future, and that's okay. If the government needs me, they can come for me. But Mexico has entered the chat, and it's interesting because Mexico is a country to be honest, I hadn't really thought a lot about when it came to cyber defenses and preserving their networks. And the more I learn about the history of the country, in many cases, this is my personal opinion, we, as leaders, dominant leaders in cybersecurity to this day, have neglected our neighbor. And it's extraordinary because they have a war going on too. It's the cartel war. And I think we have maybe some obligation. Certainly commercially, I feel this way. Patriots in the room, we could probably unite over that conversation too. Everything from border security, the drug penetration into the United States, and just general geopolitical relations and their agenda with the United States. But Mexico is a country that I didn't think was going to enter my viewpoint. I mentioned I was on a trip recently, both to Asia and to the UK, and so Japan, they've had radical changes to their laws regarding cybersecurity. For the first time ever, both their self-defense organization and their commercial industries are allowed to proactively engage in cyber defense. And so what's that? Well, that's hunting in the network. And for those of you who understand offensive operations, this is sort of the gray space between defense and offense. And so Japan, which I would argue is one of our most important geopolitical partners in one of the most active threat regions today. That's a country that I'm seeing a lot of activity with and hope that we lock arms with for so many reasons. And then, of course, you have the consortium in Europe, in particular our NATO allies.
Yeah, we're one of, if not the only defense accelerator that is focused on Indo-PACOM, where we're running accelerations from Singapore, Japan, Australia, and bringing them in. And quite frankly, it's nothing new to the soft community. Tosh, I'm going to kick this over to you because I think you have a phenomenal example of bringing folks in, getting their input, and really understanding their decision space as to why potentially where the United States is going may not be the best move for them. If you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, sure. First of all, are there any internationals in the crowd? Yeah, Five Eyes or where from? Poland? Okay. I'm sorry? Israel, okay. UK, okay. All right. So yeah, I'll jump into that real quick. Our national security strategy previously, or when I was running PM Soft Lethality, called for expanding our partnerships and working forward towards interoperability. So at my level, that meant trying to make sure our systems were interoperable, or at least we knew where each key partner nation was going. We ran a range out in Nevada called the International Special Operations Forces Range, and 17 partner countries were invited to it. Or 34 actually were invited, and 17 showed up pretty consistently while I was there. We added on to that a three-day symposium at the end of the range, where the range itself, you go out and shoot the latest technologies. You invite any industry partner who has something that U.S. SOCOM is going after, a technology that interests us. When, we go to these, I'll back up a little bit and say we go to these things like AUSA or SHOT Show or something. A lot of tech companies will come and tell us they have these things that can do have amazing effects. Some people may exaggerate a little bit, we have found, weirdly enough. So we have a prove it, right? So we have a prove it event. We're like, hey, it sounds amazing, come out of the desert and actually show it to us. So we put on a 3-day event, everybody comes out, we invite all our international partners, like I said, 17 countries usually show up, sometimes more, and we shoot everything you can think of under the sun for 3 days. The following 3 days, we sit in a room with our closest allies. At the last one that I hosted, it was the Five Eyes: Norway, Sweden, France, and Israel. And we sit and we talk about where each country is going and each lethality technology that we control. And a great example of where are we going and where it's not compatible. We were, as SOCOM, going after a .338 machine gun, right? And UK got up and said, hey, we're not interested in your .338, we're not interested in your 6.8, because we don't know if we can get it when the war kicks off, right? We need to be compatible with NATO. And it's completely understandable, but it was good to know that they're not even considering moving there right now. But at least they know our perspective on 6.8, which is the Army's going to 6.8. They've invested so much money in it, and it's an incredible round. It has its drawbacks, and it has a lot of development to do. But we're going there. But we need to retain backwards compatibility with our 7.62 and our 5.56. It's something we learned at a forum like that at SOCOM.
I think that was critical, right? You invited at the lowest kind of the discussion level, that small forum. SOF is very small compared to everyone else, but that's probably the best environment to get an early start in understanding a decision and how it affects an industrial base. I'm looking at you representing the UK for everybody here. But I found that very fascinating. And part of what I think the Department of Defense and potentially others are trying to maybe even model the soft, but what you're seeing here, like with the Army Applications Laboratory, right? It is a node, it is a hub, but you're starting to see these hubs show up outside of the United States with those allied partners. Gia, I know you had some thoughts on that matter, and I'd love for you to expand upon that for the crowd.
Yeah, I think maybe what you're getting at is a community, or sometimes it's formal. I think there was an audience member that talked about how fast they were able to move, or maybe it was the keynote, the secretary, who said, essentially the decision maker, the logistician, the execution arm, and program manager were all co-located together. And so that proximity made decision making really fast. I love the idea because we're still humans, and we're still, we gravitate towards people and like to make face-to-face decisions, I think. At least that's true in, I would say, commercial business now. having a place to incubate an idea all the way to productization, making it generally available, and then procured is really important. And I love that Austin has become this for the defense communities. I do think this is the defense tech hub in America right now. I'm sure the Valley may have a different opinion on that, but because I
Valley
moved to
people here.
Austin, I feel this way. So I think that's really important. So then how do you do this globally? Because again, I care a lot about the international community. And a really unique idea came out, and it's NATO-based. And it was back in 2017, actually. Estonia and Luxembourg, of all countries, agreed to put together something called a data embassy. And thinking about interoperability of systems, interoperability of data and information sharing is probably the #1 obstacle outside of, cleared material to sharing. And so to the extent that we can put together sharing centers, and we've got a lot of frameworks in America that have been exported outside the United States. Let's take the ISACs, for example, the Information Sharing Analysis Centers. And I'm talking squarely about cybersecurity. I'm sure this applies to major end items as well. But having a place where you can have tool developers nug out problems together, especially coalition partners, having a place where maybe there's a range, maybe policies at the nation state level can be socialized with one another, especially as they're changing and evolving rapidly based on threat. I think that's really important. So I like the data embassies. I think that's a really cool idea. I haven't seen that mimicked anywhere else. And also where you hold the data is really important. While at Amazon, sovereign cloud became a major initiative with the company, to the point that they have a vice president that leads it all. And this is the notion that, countries should be allowed to have their Amazon cloud, but the data resides in country. Amazon never sees it. It never comes to the United States. And so how, using that sort of model, how do you keep things sovereign but still share? That is a question, but I like the data embassy idea.
It's a good one. Somebody get the website really quick. Look, one of the questions from the audience was, you got the rundown of all of these policies, all of the checklists, and really to get things going. Tosh, I don't know if you could speak to the navigation of policy and potentially what you encountered with that. If there's anything of note that you found speed or to leverage.
No.
No.
Sorry. Jumping back to something Mr. Mason said earlier, I think probably what slowed me down the most at SOCOM, when he talked about the material release process, that it's a nightmare, he wasn't kidding. It's tough, even for SOCOM, where SOCOM is known to tailor a lot. We can't tailor around law, right? You have to follow the law, or there's severe consequences. When you start talking about regulations like the DFARS, you can bend those. In fact, one of my favorite quotes that I've heard lately from an acquisition professional was, if you follow every regulation in the DFARS, you will never field a system. So you have to be willing to bend some of them. So going back to the material release idea, think about the just to get a safety release, you have to go through a fuse board, and that's a long process, right? You have to start thinking of your height of burst sensors, your electronic safety and arming devices, and then the explosive itself. So if you have a foreign system or any system that you're interested in that doesn't use an approved explosive like C4, man, you're talking years to get a new explosive that is maybe proven years over in combat. A great example is an Israeli system that we were chasing after for SOCOM that was actually being used in combat very effectively, very safely, and we couldn't get it in the United States. We had to switch out the warhead, switch out the electronic safety and armor device, switch out the height of burst sensor, and now you're talking instead of 6 month, to 10-month procurement. Now you're talking 3 to 5 years, because you have to get all of that tested, all of it approved. Not only that, we've had key partners like Canada that have systems that have been through testing at NATO labs, and our policies, or at least the regulations that some of our safety officials follow, don't accept testing done at some of the state of the art places like Canada or Germany. We've even run into problems that the Navy wouldn't accept Army testing, or the Army wouldn't accept Navy testing, and so we have to test them at both locations, which costs us money, costs the industry money, and costs everybody time. And the person who loses in the end is the warfighter on the back end of this.
Yeah, just to put some metrics behind that, I'd be interested to see a case study of all the money that was applied, and then at the end, what did the warfighter get from that? You know, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, we pointed this out, and we've worked on it, and it is a problem being addressed at the time I left. I know that the WESERB was re-looking at what testing had to be done, and some of it does make sense, right? Because the Navy has to test things for being on a ship, right? They don't want anything on their ship that's gonna burn down.
The high sea states,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about multi-billion-dollar assets when you talk about a naval ship, and you don't want your $100,000 missile sinking something. Whereas the Army, we're just keeping them in a depot.
So wait, can this be my chance
Yeah,
to plug
please.
recruitment for becoming a cyber warfare warfighter or officer? Because when you want explosives in cyber, you can get them real quick. And the moment that you're exploited, if you're working offensive cybersecurity, let's say, the moment it's compromised, a lot of them are one and done. So it's done, and you're on to building the next. And we don't wait 4 years. And a lot of our operators are hobbyists, and so if you're a hobbyist, there are ways for you to go back to your home of record or wherever you please and investigate by way of threat research all kinds of explosives that are available online. So our process is a lot faster in the cyber warfare domain, and our $2.33 fish kit can take down these $11 million missile systems. You can come talk to me about non-human identity after this, and I'll explain it.
Well, just to kind of wrap, before we go to questions, you've seen a lot, and you have seen a lot in not just the domestic, but from the global space. And I'm curious, what keeps you up at night, or what should fundamentally we should be thinking about to kind of communicate back to the policymakers? I just had a conversation, in fact, yesterday with the special advisor to Secretary Rubio for AUKUS. And a lot of the questions that he was asking us, and Rich Julian, who's from Boca Capital, which is a primarily AUKUS-focused investment firm, what can they do differently? What can we do from a policy perspective, or potentially, change things in order to be able to communicate, get those standards out there, and not give the advantage away?
If I stay within the cyber domain, there's a few things that keep me up at night, and I have given a nod to one already, is who are the possible mission partners at the nation-state level that we've left behind? And is there a way to re-examine relationships and geopolitical relations so that at the end of the day, not only can we solve some of their domestic problems, but it's all for the interest of the defense of our country. And I said it, Mexico, that keeps me up at night. And I've spent a lot of my time focusing on the Indo-PACOM theater in my life, and never much looked at LCC, Latin America, Caribbean. And Mexico's shocking. And if you're a Texan, something that's in our news every single day, but when you really start to investigate the troubles that the country has, I do think we have an obligation, and there are network things that we could do commercially time now, so that keeps me up. The second thing that keeps me up, and this is like a 100,000-foot view, quite strategic, is maintaining trusted partnerships throughout the world. And that while looking inwardly to, reindustrialize our defense base, that's the actual terminology that was used in the NDA last week, how can we do that without disrupting or completely putting upside down our partnerships with our trusted coalition nations? Because we are headed into, I think, a future that sounds a lot like kinetic warfare. So those are the things that keep me up at night. I have hopeful feelings too, but those are the ones that,
Some positive dreams,
Yeah.
right? Tosh, over to you.
So what really keeps me up at night is my daughter. She kicks like a mule in her sleep. So, yeah. I'll answer the first part of your question. What keeps me up at night? And the answer is autonomy, and our unwillingness to embrace fully what the capabilities and autonomy are. What I like to say is the day that full-scale warfare kicks off with a nation who's willing to unleash autonomy, willing to send a thinking missile forward and just say, hey, this is your range of targets, just go kill something. And we're not ready to reciprocate with that sort of technology. We're gonna lose that day. And we're gonna have to rely on our oceans to protect us until we're ready to fight. And hopefully they will. It has to be a dial, right? There has to be, right now we're stuck at man in the loop or man on the loop. That's where we are right now today in our policies. But we also have to have the capability to crank it all the way to the right and say, have a commander say, okay, send them, and it's just hunting down prioritized targets. Just go forward, go that way, and find the enemy and kill it. Because if we don't have that and the enemy does, man, I don't want to be on the battlefield that day.
And the enemy's not operating with DFARS
No.
as a limb fact or, you know, the statutes of that.
But it
So-
does give me hope, though, that we have the best software developers and the best autonomy here in the United States. It's not that we can't do it. We could do it today, but we need to be able to stockpile that capability.
Big time, big time. So I want to open it up to the audience to ask some questions. Sam, I don't know who's running around, but any questions from the community? No? Yes, sir.
Hi, John Corder with Angels Aircraft. So one of the questions I have with international sources of material is, what if we're not procuring physical things, but we're licensing designs and things that were developed, for example, in Ukraine, to be able to be deployed or developed further for U.S. assets?
When you say license, are you talking about hardware? Are you talking about software, or what?
I think it could apply to some software, but I think mostly focused towards hardware designs and things of that nature, say some effect or a UAV or something of that nature.
Okay, I'll take that one for a minute. So when you're talking about foreign materials entering the U.S. market, something that we may be interested in buying, like a good entry point is the Foreign Comparative Test Office if you haven't worked with them. So if you're a company that's looking at that sort of tech, first thing I would say was you need to build interest in the user community, right? So if I as a program manager had the SEALs or the Green Berets or Rangers come to me and say, this system is great. We've seen videos of it in Ukraine doing some great stuff. I'll try to go out and find a way. Sometimes I actually did this through the Foreign Comparative Test Office, buying a bunch of the systems, testing them out, comparative to U.S. systems, what we have. And if it's something better, something cheaper, the 3 criteria I gave you earlier, yeah, we can find ways to be able to procure that system. Yeah. Were you more specific than that?
Licensing for U.S. built as opposed to procuring from Ukraine, for example.
Yeah, I don't think I'm technical enough in licensing to answer that question, but the only example I could think of is that when I was working with a company, an Israeli company that had designed a great system, they were talking with Lockheed Martin to just build the system here in the United States. The deal fell through because there wasn't enough demand signal from the Army to actually entice Lockheed Martin to build the plant to do it. But I don't think that it was a policy thing that stopped them.
Well, to that note, right, I think it's early engagement. It's communicating to the user base, right? You mentioned Lockheed Martin. The primes, They know this inside and out, and that's kind of their competitive advantage. And so even through the user community, looking with a trusted partner, that prime is somebody that can kind of help you navigate that in a way, right? Maintain your own competitive advantage. But we found them to be very useful for us to reach certain stages, right? In the end, there wasn't a bigger demand signal for them. But again, bringing them along in the journey, we learned, we understood, because they have all the familiarity with the navigation of licensing, things like that.
I will say that whenever we start looking at the system as a program manager, I'm going to start digging into the supply chain, right? Because any components that have Chinese components, Russian components, or anything, may be a showstopper for us. But as long as you're using U.S. or allied supply base, you can definitely do it.
Thank you for the question. Any others? No? All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you very much.
We'll be back at 11:30 for our second panel, so go ahead and take a break. My apologies. 11:15. Be back here for our second panel. 11:15.
Make sure to hit.
Got about 5 minutes till this next panel starts, 11:15. So start looking for seats in about 5 minutes. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we got about 1 minute before we kick off this next panel. Artie, we're going to need you to sit down or you're going to get kicked out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this next panel on the road. We can go ahead and find our seats. All right, for our last panel of the day, we're going to be talking about emerging capabilities and technologies that are in our industrial base that are just changing the way warfighters are looking at navigating and maneuvering on the battlefield. Moderating this panel, you've heard from him this morning, Colonel Clay McVeigh. He's our Deputy Director here at Army Applications Lab. We're going to have Ethan Thornton from Mach Industries, Chris Edgett from Zone 5, Matt Rabinovich from Kaleidoscope, and then Dave Hubler from Firestorm. Please welcome our next panel on the stage.
All right, welcome back. This is the second panel for the second day. I'd like to introduce my panel before we start talking some of the specific questions that we have. But here, to my immediate left, we have Ethan Thornton from Mach Industries. He's the founder and CEO of Mach, a next-generation defense technology and manufacturing company. Mach is currently on contract with the Army Applications Laboratory to develop a high-speed, long-range loiter munition that they call the Viper. And then to his left, we have Dave Hubler from Firestorm.
Sorry, it's Chris.
Oh, sorry. I do have number 2 next to this. So Chris Edgett from Zone 5 Technologies. He's the vice president there. He has a background in clean energy and product management. And Zone 5 Technologies is working in the UAS, counter-UAS, air-launched effects space, utilizing an open architecture for the rapid integration of weapons and other UAS payloads. And Zone 5 is working with DIU to deliver an affordable lethal payload within the air domain. Then we have Matt Rabinovich from Kaleidoscope. He's the founder and CEO, and he comes from a background in real-time tracking and sensing systems for commercial augmented reality devices. Kaleidoscope is focused on developing tracking, sensing, and targeting systems, and he has previously won and participated in DoD's APFIT program, and they also provide all the AI-enabled cameras that are used currently to protect the airspace in the National Capital Region as part of a larger Air Force integrated air system. And then at the end, we have Dave Hubler from Firestorm, their director for Army Partnerships. He's a 26-year U.S. Army Special Forces veteran with extensive leadership and experience in Southwest Asia and Africa. And Firestorm is developing a mission-adaptable aerial vehicle that looks and hopes to be 1/5 the total cost of traditional methods, and that can be built and configured in hours instead of weeks, independent of location. And then Firestorm was recently selected as one of the 40 companies for the Army's Autonomous Overwatch project. So with that, I have an initial question, and then we'll kind of take the conversation from there. So I'm curious to hear from each of you what your specific technologies are that you're working on and how those might relate to launched effects. So we'll start with Ethan and go down from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few different, launch effect platforms. First is Viper. That's the one we're on contract with AAL to develop. It's turbojet-powered vertical takeoff long-range strike asset. And so essentially the goal is to provide survivable fires downrange without a launcher, without anything to back target. And then this is also a flexible platform that you can deploy off the wings of aircraft and do other things with. So low cost, turbojet-powered, one-way munition. Our other platform of relevance for launched effects is called Glide. This is a stratospheric high-speed glide vehicle. So again, payload glider drops from an altitude in the stratosphere and deploys effects downrange.
Hey, so I had to laugh about the description of launched effects because we have cruise missiles that air launch, pylon launch, palletized launch. We have counter UAS interceptors that can go off maritime platforms. They can go off helicopters off a Hellfire rail. They can go off ground, and they can do ground to surface and ground to air. And then we have a set of VTOL vehicles that are more of our legacy and multi-copter type vehicles. And not one of those things qualifies as a launched effect according to the definition of the Army, which is like very specific. And I might actually say it's more like, it's less of a category and more like a segment like cruise missiles or something, because there are lots of things that launch that don't fit that definition. Anyway, we're big on open platform. We built from the ground up for MOSA, SOSA, and WOSA, and we actually provide a lot of feedback into the messages that don't exist. We're very open with pricing and open with architectures.
Yeah, so at Kaleidoscope, we're making, well, currently, I guess to back up, we're a very small company and private, so no investors, so we kind of have to pick and choose, you know, individual things that we work on at a time right now, but we're pretty focused on long-range drone-to-drone defeat systems, so basically a fixed-wing platform that can fly into other fixed-wing platforms at long range. And with that, it's a very open system too, so really our specialty is more on the tracking, sensing, targeting side of house, and so we'll bring together complete systems around that, but we think of each of those components as really modular too. So we have some customers, for example, that already have their own air platforms or have a stock of air platforms that they want to modify to make into air-to-air defeat systems, and so for that, we can actually just provide what we're calling the seeker, which is essentially, you know, the compute, the sensor, and all the software and algorithms to make the thing do the thing. But for other customers, we can provide complete systems too. So that's what we're working on in this space right now.
All right, well, thank you for having us. Firestorm's happy to be here. The premise behind Firestorm when the founders started it was to provide a low-cost, autonomous, modular UAS platform that would support exactly a lot of the feedback that we're getting out of Ukraine. Rapid adaptation at the edge, the ability to prototype, iterate, and scale production at the edge. And what they did is they based that off, our founders based that off really an additive manufacturing base to develop Tempest, which is our flagship platform. And so additive manufacturing allows the ability for the soldiers with our XL platform, which is our expeditionary additive manufacturing, the ability to iterate on the current design, integrate new payloads, adapt to a rapidly evolving operational environment. So in effect, what we've created is a platform that's engineered for evolution and really a factory at the front to support that. Now, where Firestorm's come since our inception, is now we're actually partnering with a lot of industry partners, not only to put the subcomponents or the payloads, the sensors, the munitions on our UAS platform, but more importantly now produce their systems out of XL, which has really given the soldiers or the operational force a lot more diversity in what they're able to work with and their shooter solution, for lack of a better term, at the edge. Thank you.
Thank you. And then to kind of follow up, so you've told us a little bit about the technologies you have. If we were to say today we want to employ these in formations, what technologies do you think you have that you're working on that are ready today? And then what technologies do you think maybe need to be baked just a little bit more before we actually put them in the hands of soldiers?
It's a good question. Yeah, so I think on the platform side, the closest one for us is Glide, right? It's the dropped long-range glider. That's pretty far along. We're doing demonstrations pretty frequently now. I think, so yeah, on the platform side, I think we each have platforms we're bringing to bear that are pretty close to being mature. I think the bigger question is, what are the enabling technologies behind these platforms to give us sort of a strategic edge over China, right? Like on the supply-based side, and then on the sort of unique tech side, what are the things that are very, very important to make sure that all of our platforms are successful in theater? I think on the manufacturing side, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but there are a few components, turbojet engines. On the munitions side, like there are a few things to work through before we can start delivering these things by the thousands. And then as we look at beating China, if we're producing the same quadcopters, the same cruise missiles that China is, we're going to be outproduced. And so the bigger optimization has to be, how do you create asymmetry? And I think a way to do that is by digging really, really deep into the core enabling technologies. I think one of those is like GPS-denied navigation and targeting sets. And all of us investing very deeply as companies and making sure that we have the edge as a country in that domain. I think the next is the propulsion side. I think there are a few novel propulsion architectures over the next few years that will start being used more often. Stuff like solid fuel ramjets, really pushing the envelope on these micro turbines. Something that's interesting, like most of the turbines we're using at this point from from existing suppliers, this industry was actually like a hobbyist industry, like 5 to 10 years ago. So like you look at King Tech, you look at JetCat, a lot of these suppliers really haven't designed their engines for mass manufacture. They certainly haven't designed them for performance. And so I think as an industry as well, really doubling down on the key enabling technologies. And I think the most important there is propulsion and navigation.
Hobbyists being like RC aircraft?
They were literally used for RC aircraft. It's crazy. Because you look back and, I mean, 5, 10 years ago, before unmanned systems were as big a deal as they were, like, it was target drones and RC aircraft that were using this, like, 100 to 200 pound thrust engine class. And so now we're facing this reality where in Ukraine, these small turbojet engines are really, really important for conducting warfare. And so that's an industry that needs to be built in the U.S.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, and I agree with that. We're right now scaling for Franklin Affordable Mass Munition. So we're in that, we've got that split 50-50, as well as another similar program that's with coalition partners. It's pylon launch. So we're already in the vertical part of the ramp. Turbines are our number one constraint. We have the counter-UAS missile is we have demand for 3,000 a month, and so we're planning on trying to get there. And this is where my question came from earlier about all of our vendors are on board with this, as long as they have 6 to 9 months with somebody willing to say we're signing on the line to get that. And then some multi-copter platforms that we see potentially being even higher volume, but more straightforward to implement, because that stuff's already well scaled.
So yeah, ready to go now. I think our drone-to-drone platform is quite close. We're doing our first domestic demonstration in about a month here, which will be cool. But what's really interesting to us is we kind of look at our enabling technology here as kind of that seeker kit, basically the thing that makes the thing do the thing, right? Flying into that other thing. And so what's interesting there is I kind of look at that as something that needs a lot of iteration moving forward in the future, because what we'll end up doing too, and it's interesting from an engineering perspective, is we'll be thinking about, okay, if we're on the other side of that, how do we start thinking about autonomously evading something that's trying to target us, right? And that kind of becomes a bit of a race, and it's an engineering race too, to see who can have the best tracking sensing systems on those devices, doing it in real time, to kind of out dogfight the other competitor that you're going after. So yeah, in terms of what needs more development, I think that type of thing is something that's going to perpetually need to be getting better.
As far as what's ready for market, Tempest is ready for market. It's already being delivered to customers now. I would say, kind of caveating some of the points that already came up, it's what else do we want to put into Tempest? What are the payloads? What's the maturity of them? And then integrating those in exercises. A DDIL comes up a lot. That's something the Ukrainians have been quick to let us know that we're not ready for, as far as near-peer adversary, as far as our systems as a whole, and I say U.S. systems. Firestorm, we build the truck. So if you look at Tempest, it's a truck. I'm not sponsored by Ford, but I'll use the F-150 analogy. I can get a baseline F-150. I could put a hybrid engine in it. I could put an electrical engine in it. I could put a diesel in it. I could put an 8-foot bed on it. So that's what Tempest is designed for. It's really just what's needed is get out the customer, determine what the specific requirements are, and then modify or adapt the platform to those requirements. And what do I mean by that? Right now, there's a lot of we're really enamored with this high-end, exquisite capability, but then you'll have senior leaders kind of throw Ukrainian numbers at you. Ukrainians are not flying every Group 2 drone with a gimbaled EO/IR camera. That's why you see so many daylight strikes. They're going with a cheap, same camera that a similar camera to what you have on your phone. And they're also not worried about NDAA compliance. So they're working their own supply chains. But those price points, we get that by basically building a platform. And if it's a modular platform, we can provide that, once again, to the shooter solution, the target that's there. We don't have to build an exquisite platform that costs a lot of money that then we're using just to hit some fixed object in the day 60 kilometers away. XL is ready for market. I would say right now when we showed out or showcased XL at PCC5, that was kind of like a gateway drug. And the question was, what else can we use this for? What else can we print with it? And that's why we're talking about now integrating with industry partners on Group 1's FPVs. But more importantly, you see all these innovation, these work labs in the military. So attritable is a very subjective term. What's attritable for a Group 2? What's attritable for a Group 3? What's attritable for a Group 1 or an FPV or PBAS? We've got smart soldiers. Technology's advanced. They're printing in their innovation labs. PBAS, the purpose-built attritable system, it's out there. But if we really want to get to some of these price points that we're talking about, it's probably with integrating with government on a government design with a build kit. They could slam out 900 to 1,000 of these a month at an exercise, at a deployment. So yeah, that's where I think it's just maturing where this progression, this evolution goes. But as far as, XL being ready to deliver, it's on a road show right now. I just came back from Camp Grayling. I'll be going up there. And policy is really driving now. I think it came up earlier. You've got all the edicts from SecDef. Senator Slotkin just passed a bill, Advanced Manufacturing in Support of Defense. So there's now more policy push that's really driving advanced manufacturing, not only for UAS components, but really think Class 9, Class 2 across the board.
So I know when we drafted this question, I wasn't thinking the answers you guys were going to give was that the development is in a lot of the subcomponents to these parts. And I know, Ethan, at Mach, you kind of came across this need for a jet engine. What are the other components out there that doesn't exist in the U.S. defense industrial base that we need to invest in order to enable something like launched effects to really kind of come to fruition?
Well, I would just say, again, invest in, we just need to buy stuff. There's a known thing in the world that if you buy stuff, you get more stuff. If you just like spend a bunch of money to have people build factories, that's not the right solution. And it's seekers, it's comms, it's antennas, it's like anything remotely sophisticated, because a lot of these systems, our systems, I'll be the first to admit, it's not that complicated. We went from Rusty Daggers to a counter-UAS missile that's basically a mini Rusty Dagger in 7 months. Like, it's a tube with some electronics and fuel and a turbine. And so the one thing I want to say about scale is I think people still haven't understood the lesson from Ukraine, which is partly that Ukraine and Russia aren't that big as far as economies. And if Zone 5 can make 1,500 Rusty Daggers in a year with 180 people, like near-peer adversaries can make maybe 100 times that many, and we're just not thinking correctly about scale. We need to be thinking automotive scale, not, like big defense scale. 1,500 missiles is going to go.
It is procurement, and we have smart enough investors that will fund development on the left side of procurement, if procurement's following. And to mirror what you're saying, like I don't think any of us have fully conceptualized the scale that these things will have to be produced at. I mean, China last year approved an order for 1 million long-range strike drones, and that's a scale that I think we talk more about mass manufacture than really anyone, and that's still just sort of inconceivable. And I think we all do our best. So like Glides, the injection molded version of Glides coming online in December, and from a 100,000 square foot factory, we'll be able to have an injection mold that in 2 shots shoots the substructure and then EPP molds, and we'll be able to get to 500,000 a year out of a single factory. That's just on the airframe side. I mirror what I said previously, that the airframe is generally not the limiting factor. It's the propulsion, it's the servos, and I don't care how, you could go write companies a check for $500 million to build out a servo supply chain. It's not gonna be successful if the factories don't get turned on when they're ready. Like, as you like go down the chain in terms of what it's actually like to operate a company in this space, like, it takes me 6 months to hire technicians, right, to go run this line. And so I can go build a factory, but if I'm not getting recurring orders to like manage manpower, if I'm not getting recurring orders to sort of, the other thing with investors is they're looking for recurring revenue, right? And so like they discount RDT&E pretty heavily. And so I think we both need to be producing as a country. I think the best way to figure out what it looks like to produce is to produce. We have the money to do it. But mirroring what you were saying, I think there's an obsession with RDT&E instead of procurement.
Yeah, go ahead.
One comment on that, and I agree with everything they said. We also need diversity. Before I joined Firestorm, when I first retired, we were in an engagement with the Ukrainian SOF and the DIU, basically their drone leaders. They had not fielded one platform, and this is Ukrainian platforms, in the same area of the battlefield, and within 14 days, the Russians haven't figured out a way to counter it. So basically, if you don't have diverse comm systems that you're looking at using, and we go with just one vendor that everyone's enamored with right now, near-peer adversaries will figure out how to block that. Right now, there's a lot of problems with GPS-guided terminal guidance. Our near-peer adversaries have GNSS-denied capability. So the DDIL capability is going to be huge operating in that type of environment where GPS denied or GNSS is denied. So I think it's not only just getting specific capability ramped up, but it's also diverse capability and not just going all in on one manufacturer.
I appreciate that. So let me kind of back up to Mr. Mason's comments earlier today. He mentioned the Army's TAMR, Total Ammunition Requirement. And is that right? Yeah, I think so. Close enough. So in that document, what it outlines is here's the number of 5.56 millimeter ammunition we need in our reserves. Here's the number of missiles. I mean, it has the whole list of everything in there. And he said, launched effects is not something that needs to have a line on the TAMR because it's going to be in development faster than we want to keep it in the warehouse where it just gets outdated by tech. So how does the government signal that we need lots of these while also maintaining the ability to keep the best tech on hand at any given time?
It's a good question. And I think I loved your F-150 analogy. Like there are specific portions of these platforms that change a lot and specific portions that don't change. So like aerodynamics does not change year over year. Neither does propulsion. So like jet engines that work, airframes that fly a certain distance, those things aren't going to change. And that's why you design modular systems where you can flash new software to do edge autonomy. You can add new antennas. You can add new seekers. And so I think the belief that we're not going to acquire anything because it's changing so quickly is going to make us have no industrial base for these things when something kicks off. I think we do need to start procuring because we as companies can't, we've raised a lot of money. We've raised $200 million as a company, but that goes pretty quickly if you're not procuring these things at scale. And companies like ours will not be able to have factories to make the millions of these things that we will need if a conflict kicks off if we're not procuring. But we also need to be super intentional, right? We don't want things in the inventory that don't work. And so I think this is where having solid government strategic guidance on modularity, on being able to add new radios, being able to add new sensors, actually being able to sort of change out those platforms as things mature. I think this is a place where direct commercial overseas sales also has an important role to play. I mean, if you look back 30 years, if an overseas country is going to be spending $1 million, it's very likely they're buying US tech, right? And I think that had huge advantages for our military industrial base because we could continue developing as a country even if we're not procuring things directly ourselves. And I think the terrifying reality right now is that if Ukraine has $1 million to spend on unmanned systems, they're not buying US-made unmanned systems. And part of that is our fault. Part of that is it is our responsibility to build unmanned systems that are good enough that the Ukrainians want them. But then part of that is also on the US DoD side, realizing the importance of overseas markets for maintaining this industrial capacity, for maintaining this tech iteration speed. On the tech iteration speed side, it's often 6 months to get into a demonstration event, right? And so for us, it's impossible that we're going to continue innovating in as a country at the correct speed to develop these capabilities if we're not engaged deeply in the near-peer conflicts that are happening overseas. So that's sorry for kind of rambling there, but that's
that's good.
Yeah, and I think an interesting thing that you just mentioned is being able to swap out airframes too, right? That's a piece that I think the government historically thinks, okay, we're going to buy a drone, right? And a drone, a lot of people can make a drone. There's a bunch of different ways that you can make it. That's not necessarily what you want. You're trying to buy a capability. And so thinking about it from that perspective where maybe you're even thinking about what is it that I'm trying to defeat and what's the spec of that thing and how many of those things do I need to defeat and then what capability do I need to do that? And let there be providers that aren't necessarily the airframe manufacturer coming in to do that. Because, yeah, historically the DoD's bought a whole bunch of drones and then they sit around and they're like, well, we need to go back to this drone manufacturer or this airframe manufacturer to try to make software changes to it or compute changes or sensor changes. And that's maybe not really the best way to go about it, really thinking about the capability rather than the physical product itself.
I want to address something somebody brought up earlier, which I think is correct, which is a lot of the tech doesn't work.
And I sort of jokingly, with last SecDef, talked about, like, we almost need to have our own little war. Like, you need to just designate a test range that people can show up and try their stuff against everybody else, and you can see what actually works, because you'll be shocked at how little of it is actually useful or how easily it's defeated. And Ukraine has that all the time, and so we can say, well, we can send in some stuff we can send there to test it, but I think that that's a way we should be exercising the stuff that we're even buying to say, is this worth it? Like, we have a cruise missile and we have a counter-UAS interceptor. I've been interested for somebody to fund, like, us to fire one against the other, because there's no better way to learn than to say, like, if we can make cruise missiles at very low cost, then others can too, and we should be planning for that to happen. And for a year, nobody's taken me up on that, so.
Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts? So what I've heard then is the government needs to procure the things that aren't going to change in quantities that help shape the defense industrial base.
Or need to undergo a learning curve. So there's a learning curve of cost. And like I said, a cruise missile shouldn't cost, it's actually much, much simpler than a Ford Focus, like way simpler. The problem is that it's not been through a learning curve, and the mode of procurement doesn't encourage learning curves. And we need to be on the curve, because that's where you get to, these things shouldn't cost more than a jet ski, or, it's like $10,000, $15,000. And the problem is that the supply constraints, like comms, are, $5,000, $10,000. They don't need to be. It's a tiny little electronic board that in automotive scale would cost, a couple $100. Same thing with seekers. Like, they're just not that precious, these things. They're just not bought in. And actually, because we have a supply constraint, the folks that have those things can keep the prices high. Not that it's their design, it's just their supply constraint. So if they make X number a month, they want to get as much as they can for them, and they're not coming down that curve.
Yeah. And then we need to use that to expend it to be able to procure more to keep those lines open and to keep the technology.
Yeah, and find out if it works.
Updated.
And like assembly lines are another, you brought up hiring technicians. It's like, you learn a lot when you start building things about how to build things better, faster. You want to build stuff at Toyota can build, or any of the automotive companies can build large amounts of things at incredibly low cost and incredibly high quality. And like, we're just not learning from that. So it's not trying to just get people to get out the checkbook. One of the things you said was, can the government signal? I feel like there's been a lot of signaling. I was talking to somebody who's relatively senior at the Pentagon, and he said, I can tell you that next year there's going to be a big need for these things, but I can't sign anything. And I know that that's, Congressional Budget Authority and all this other stuff, so there's only so much that can be done. But anything we could do to create, I don't know, some sort of memorandum that says we would buy X amount if you were able to produce Y amount, that would be useful.
Okay, along those lines then, Mr. Mason also mentioned that we are signaling, and to signal you really need two things. You need a requirement that the government can point to, and then you need a funding line that you can point to. So now I want to hear y'all's perspective. Is that accurate? Are you looking, when you invest in a technology, what is the approved requirement and where is that funding within the congressional budget? And then are there other things you're also looking for to help get a signal from the government?
I'll let y'all talk
Yeah,
a
if you
lot.
want to.
So, obviously, if you're a startup and you're answering to a board of investors, having some specificity on, hey, you're TAM, SAM, and SOM, and this is where we've got the product market fit, and hey, here's the JBook line item that we're going to fall under, is super advantageous. As far as, is that completely holding us up from progressing? I would say no. Obviously, we're hearing the signaling. I think a big thing, especially that Army's doing right, is ATI and TIC. So engaging with the operational force, getting their feedback, and then that feedback's also going directly to General George, to General Rainey, and supporting the transformation process. I think that's huge. One of my recommendations, I would say, is we need more operational force involvement. I'm not just saying that because I'm a retired enlisted guy, but we've all had scar tissue if you've been in the force, that you get something, and this narrative's gone ad nauseum about acquisitions is behind. But bottom line is the momentum's there. We're integrating with the force. They're informing the transformation process. So I think that's super helpful as far as giving us, okay, hey, we we can vector this down, and we see that possibility.
Yeah, I can go.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
can go. Yeah. Yeah, so we definitely need money. Again, as a small private company, right, that doesn't have VC, that's kind of propping us up to help do the R&D side of things. It's a little bit different. We have been fortunate to make money off of some previous contracts that we've had. So that National Capital Region contract, for example, that made us a good amount of money that we could then use to invest in other opportunities. We don't have a growth person. I'm kind of the growth person. I'm not good at that. So I try to look at some of the PE line items and stuff like that. But really what we look at for the most part now, which we'll see if it pays off or not, is we try to look at what's going on and where there's a need. And so we were actually put in touch with this Ukrainian group through this Air Force person that we knew. And for the past 6 months, we've been embedded with their team, just kind of seeing what their problems are. And that's how we've come about kind of settling on this product that we're making, because we saw that it was a big need for them. It's the kind of thing that we're good at. And I believe that there's going to be a big need for that for the US DoD as well. So in terms of whether that stuff is important, I think it's important. I don't know how to navigate it necessarily right now. We are hiring for a growth position if anybody out there is looking to help us. But yeah, I'm sure that, you know, getting those signals is definitely important for small and large businesses.
I want to answer this because I've got two interesting examples, I think. One is like the launched effects, right? In that case, it's helpful to industry if you get very clear on the things that are requirements versus the places you want innovation, and both are fine. Like if you want to use your C2 system, we'll use whatever C2 you want. Like we've integrated TAC before, we've integrated other stuff. So if you say like, we want to use this C2 system, we want to come out of a tube like this, that's fine. And then innovate on range or, you know, loiter time or something. Like these are the things we need you guys to optimize around. That stuff is really helpful. Like we don't mind bounds. You know, if we decide whether to develop one of these, it's pretty straightforward type of vehicle, and it's a tube, and we make tubes, we've made folding wings, and like the physics don't change. But then there's a different kind of vehicle that we've got right now where we came across, we referred to a payload that is like, it's literally unbelievable. I had to call multiple people to say, is this thing real? And it could be a huge impact on the battlefield. The vehicle, again, is very, very straightforward to get that payload to where it needs to be, or to even put that payload on the ground. Right now, I need money for that with, it's not about requirements. Requirements often imply that you've been down a road before and you have some idea of where the solution is and like what's a little bit better. So if you made a fighter jet that went Mach 1, you want it to go Mach 1.5, like, but for things that are truly innovative, there's no requirement, and we need a pathway for those things that are like, hey, we didn't even know that we needed this thing. Somebody needs to fast track this thing I'm talking about into Ukraine in like 3 months, and we could totally do it, but we're like navigating 15 different SIBRs and, you know, all this stuff, and it's like, forget it. Like, we just need, you know, $3 million and we could have it ready. So we need to be ready for both of those scenarios.
Fully aligned. Yeah, completely agree. I don't think I can add anything, but 100% agreed.
Yeah, no, that we. You hear me? This one's good. So, you know, we meet with a lot of companies at the Army Applications Laboratory, and I'm always thoroughly impressed with, and you know you have a technology, you know it's fantastic, you know it's going to work, and you know it's going to change how we fight. And then, you know, there's a little voice in me in the back of my head that goes, yeah, but there's no requirement, there's no funding. But it's incredibly brave to me to sit and to talk to these companies that take that step and really push the government to make a requirement, to put funding in the budget, and to do that. And that's what we're committed to help here at the Army Applications Lab. So I just commend you for taking the steps when you feel like this is the right thing to do, especially for, you know, overseas in Ukraine. So talking about Ukraine, you know, it takes us a long time to get things in the budget. And then the panel that just met that talked about looking at the foreign markets, exports. How do you use the foreign markets to help augment it when the U.S. is not quite there for the funding or the requirement, or they're working towards it just slowly? Is that something you take into account, or is it just good luck when it does happen?
I think for us as a company, absolutely. And I think there are two different flavors of this. I think the first flavor is what you're describing in terms of putting things up against each other and seeing how they work, right? Like you, as a company, you can simulate this stuff. You can spend millions of dollars trying to figure out if your thing works, but having a place to go and just see is super valuable. That's still quite challenging from an ITAR sort of export approvals process when you're dealing with anything kinetic like we are. So like it took us about 6 months to get sort of an export approval, and we're still working through red tape on getting stuff over there. And so I think if we can get better at making it easier for companies to try their things, not even sell their things, like self-fund going and seeing if our things work, I think there's a lot of appetite to do that. And then there's the other side, which is once a product is productized, actually being able to leverage overseas markets to keep our supply chains up and running and keep our factories running. I'd say that's more challenging, and to date, a lot of our unmanned systems as a country aren't good enough to make sense for many other countries to buy at scale, and they're also just new. Like, we started development about a year ago. Most of these things are novel too, which is what I'm saying. But I think, yeah, if we as a country can help other countries purchase our products, that is far and away the best way to make sure that we have a supply chain ready to go when the war starts.
Yeah. That's well said. I appreciate that. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Zone 5 has historically been I want to use a slogan, but America first. America gets our stuff first. We want the best stuff to be here. And then if that stuff is approved by our customers to sell somewhere else, then we're open to that. And that gets interesting, but we don't primarily focus on international arms sales first. And that's also because we take a very open book approach with our customers. Our promise is we will end up making something that works, which not everybody can do, and we have a track record of doing that. And so we will share like what's in our stack, we'll share our full pricing structure and allow the customer to make decisions about places they want to spend money or places they don't. And that's been very successful. People are excited because apparently nobody does that. But to us, it's very straightforward. It makes all the discussions easier. It's like, if you want a better seeker, we'll put that in and we'll show you what that costs. And they're like, wow, this is great. So that's been and then, where we can get approval to then move those elsewhere, we're doing that.
For us, we actually focused on making a non-ITAR variation first. And it's complicated, it's hard, but if you're dealing with foreign nations, that can be a requirement in some cases because of dealing with all of that export control and everything. We also have an ITAR variation that is more expensive and has some better sensors, but it's definitely a consideration for us, but something that gets pretty complicated pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would say it's certainly complicated. The one benefit for Firestorm is because we are running a modular platform, we can basically offer the truck without the munition, which allows a foreign partner to put in their own munition. So that certainly helps us out. Autonomy, though, is a problem on ITAR. The other thing is right now we're actually going through this right now with a few partners in PACOM, but working through the GCC has helped that. We're also the beneficiary of an app fit that intends to put XL forward in some of these nations. So the biggest thing that we're seeing is really some of the nations, they have the technology to support your subcomponents, but they don't necessarily have a UAS manufacturing base. And so that's where we're helping them out, which also provides a unique capability of, hey, we have now partners that are going to be running almost like an international COTS variant of our platform using their manufacturing capability. Which I think offers some significant advantages for us as a nation as well.
Thanks. I know you've kind of talked about some of these processes that you're going through. I'm always curious how a company figures out, I need to get ITAR compliant. Here's step one. Like, I would have no idea how to start that process. How would a young company, maybe in the audience, start to do those things?
Hire a lawyer. They will tell you, if you don't want to go to jail, here's what you do.
Lots of Googling too.
Google, yeah.
Lots of Googling.
ChatGPT.
Good, exactly how I would do it. Let me ask about the other requirements you may be faced with. A lot of you dealing with airworthiness requirements, and then there's testing that goes with that. Fuse board requirements, and then there's testing that goes with that. soldier safety release, and then there's testing that goes with that. How do you even navigate that process or start to go down that route with the government?
I think you're furthest along.
Yeah, we're going through that exactly, and the answer is you ask for money from the customer, and you say like,
Meaning the government.
the government.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So where we're going through that, we say, here's the timeline and cost of the requirements you've laid out, and we all want to shrink the timeline, but you have to decide. We're just very transparent about that. Like, if you want to suspend this requirement or make this 90-day test a 30-day test or something like that, we're happy to do it. We're literally indifferent to that decision, and we understand making a set of decisions around a whole bunch of technical warrant holders or stakeholders about what you can and can't do, and then you let your customer points of contact help have those discussions about like, hey, if we want this thing out there in 6 months, like we're not going to be able to do the 1-year timeline, and also you can show the costs again very transparently about if you want this, well, it's going to be this much, and if you want this, it's less, and then work with the customers.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I think, he brought up SIBRs earlier, but like right now, we've got a strap buy with AFRL, and they're helping us get through the Fuse Safety Review Board on that aspect. The Fuse Safety Review Board is a problem, and it's a lengthy process. So if you don't have a government partner, you better find a prime that knows how to navigate the system, because that's probably how you have to do it. I would say there's also opportunity, depending on what space you're in partnering with primes, because they have the experience on navigating that process, and a lot of times they can accelerate your navigation through that process.
Good.
There's also something about the way we do procurement that we talk about internally in how it causes you to create tech debt for yourself, because you're trying to get something cheap and fast. And I think there's value in like get to MVP quickly, but sometimes you can make something that isn't going to meet the eventual requirements, but you like level up with the SIBR, and then you get a $5 or $10 million contract, and there's all these things you're gonna have to fix. And then at the time, you do a demo and show a video of something happening, and everybody's like, okay, we want to buy 1,000 of those things, and you're like, yeah, but there's a whole bunch of V&V, like we skipped to get it to do that thing real fast, and like at some point somebody needs to budget for all that stuff to get done if you want things to be at the quality level and reliability that we expect. Or you need to make a deliberate decision that like, hey, we're going to field a less reliable thing, which is okay, especially if it's like a cheap multicopter or something. It doesn't matter if half of them die, it's okay, but like people need to have that conversation. Like we've in some cases in procurement presented 2 timelines. We're like, here's the accelerated timeline if you drop all that stuff, but if you want that stuff, which we understand, it's going to be an extra 6 or 9 months, which is okay, but again, think about that consciously. Because there is a big difference between something that did the thing once versus something that can do the thing reliably and work in cold weather and hot weather and all that.
Matt, have you dealt with any testing with the Air Force or in your efforts?
We have dealt with a lot of testing with things like fuse boards and warheads and stuff like that. We basically are not big enough that we can deal with that kind of thing. So typically we'll provide everything but that, right? In a lot of cases, government customers have their own system that they want to be integrated, but we're not at that point with this product just yet.
Okay. You have any thoughts, Ethan?
No, I think similar. Like on the fuse board side specifically, we've kind of taken a dual path approach of finding a partner who's done that many times, pushing them a bit of capital to get us a design. They started going through that process, and then also being agnostic to government payloads that are available.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask one more question about launched effects and then kind of go to the audience. So lots of discussion on how launched effects works. It's very involved with multiple technologies all having to work together at the same time, and no one company is doing all of these technologies. So how does the government help industry kind of collaborate to create this ecosystem of launched effects when the government hasn't published the IEEE standard of standards yet? Because we just don't know. How can we help here?
I think thinking about it in terms of trucks and payloads is not a bad way to do it, which is like trucks are governed by physics and cost and manufacturing, and payloads are like, high technology and cleverness, and some kid from MIT should be able to get something on a truck, like if it works in, a very short period of time. But like the trucks are going to be, sort of more durable And so, and you don't need lots of different trucks, but you might need lots of payloads. And so, you know, having 3 or 4 trucks is probably enough before you're like, I don't want to deal with all the fueling for this one versus that one. And maybe 2's better, maybe 1's better, but like thinking about those 2 separately is probably a good idea.
Completely aligned. Yeah, I mean, deciding what the trucks look like he said, it's very expensive to have a large number of trucks, and the trucks tend to be good at doing a wider variety of things. And then trust industry to figure out the partnership side. Like, I think it's extremely painful if government says to 5 companies, I want you to design this portion of the platform, I want you to design this portion of the platform. Choose who's designing the platform, and then we can partner to figure out. I mean, we'll have conversations about the jet engine on the back end or the fuel system and these other things.
Yeah, so that's a good point, because I'll temper what I just said with, there was something we were on where they said we're going to need a lot of volume, and the way for this to work is all the trucks should be able to interchange engines. And all of us on the industry side were like, you can't make more F-150s by telling Ford to put a GM V8 in the F-150. Like, that is the worst idea ever. Just scale up the Ford V8 and have Chevy build, you know, more Sierras and like, that's crazy. So like, we got to also figure out where that interchangeability makes sense.
And then build frameworks to test payloads quickly.
Yep.
Like, you should be doing demonstrations in war games once a month. Everyone should be able to immediately roll up with a payload that hasn't gone through any of the processes, see if it works, figure out what doesn't work. That side should be very, I hate to use the word hacky, but very, like, random kids showing up and being like, hey, try this payload type.
They might have the best thing.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from Matt or Dave?
Yeah, I think doing lots of events like that is really good. I think what's hard for us is that a lot of the times those are unpaid, right? And that means that we're only an engineering company right now. We only have engineers. So that means it's taking up time from us actually developing the product that we're trying to do. And so it's kind of a difficult balance of figuring out which events we go to and which ones we don't. I think if those were paid at all or better paid, that could be really helpful for some companies, companies like ours. I also think that the truck analogy is really good. I think that government spending a little bit more money on, so I guess to back up, like from my perspective, we've got something that's 85 to 90% of the way there for a bunch of different use cases. And that's going to require a truck for all of those use cases. It might be a slightly different truck for different ones, right? But if the government can say, hey, this is the problem that we have and the problem that we want to solve, and let a company decide what truck they want to use, which different components they want to use, and then see which trucks kind of emerge as the best trucks for those use cases, I think that's a really productive thing for smaller businesses that need that money to get kind of that last 10 or 15% of the way there.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, you know, we talk sometimes about, from industry, we want very specific requirements. But sometimes dictated requirements can actually be constraining versus, like Matt just brought up, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and let these best-in-class, world-class engineers at all these companies help come up with a solution to that. But I know, like the X-Tech Overwatch event, how do you incentivize collaboration with something that you already really like? And I think this is something, you know, there's kind of this narrative, specifically amongst the startup or the tech community, where primes are bad. You know, it's all tech startups that's going to solve everything. You know, Firestorm's had good experiences in partnering with primes, and there's value to partnering the primes. Now, is there probably some sort of incentive mechanism that acquisitions should look at? So, hey, we really like this tech startup, to encourage a prime to work with them, because, you know, AtFit's there to help us, you know, kind of get over and raise our MRL level and scale production. But I mean, if you've got a prime that's got a program and they want to integrate your tech or your capability, that's huge for a startup. So yeah, I kind of talked out of both sides. Specificity sometimes, you know, leniency on others. But the Overwatch event, you know, they're incentivizing. I mean, they basically haven't, you know, made it a requirement, but they're saying, hey, the companies that got down selected in the first phase, if you partner with another company in this second phase, it'll probably increases your chances of getting to the next level. So there's a financial incentive for us to partner. Now there's 40 companies there, so we can find which companies have the best match for us. But I think there's value in incentivizing tech. Otherwise, you just have these kind of disparate stovepipe SIBR exercises going on, and then you've got all these great projects that are, you know, going in different silos. And before it sounds critical, I do think Army's doing a great job of how they're going about this. Like, I think the TIC and the ATI is the way to go. I do think iterating faster on T&E or experimentation events would be very helpful, but then I also acknowledge Matt. You know, even if it's a free event to attend, getting your equipment there, getting your people there, for small companies, that adds up quickly.
It's a cost. Yeah. Thank you. And Dave, thanks for bringing in the truck analogy that kind of helped carry the conversation for all that. So we'll open it up to the floor. We have about 10 more minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say, like, on a lot of these issues, I've just been thinking about how, whether it's moving through approvals fast, or whether it's pairing with some of best-in-class payloads and things like that, I know they got a little punch in the nose in the last week, but DIU has been an incredible partner on this stuff, like both in pointing us to technology that actually works, technology that's valid. Like, there's tons of stuff out there, and so people who are going through and figuring out what works and what doesn't and really delivers is valuable, and also shepherding us through those conversations with customers to say, like, how do we move fast? DIU's been amazing, and some of our biggest programs, like, they wouldn't have happened at the speed that they've happened without DIU. So.
No, I appreciate that. I will pass word to them when I see them upstairs. And often I think the government would benefit from knowing what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah.
Knowing what worked as much as knowing what didn't work. So I appreciate that. Okay.
Sorry, last thing. That was the same for us, by the way. We had no experience with the DoD ever until DIU found out about us through, I don't know how, but that was our foray into the DoD space, and they've been really good for us too.
Yeah, and we've got something where we need a low-cost radar, and they just publish their list of, like, here's the 10 folks that have low-cost sensing. And it's like, I'm going to go to their list because they're already good people who vetted good stuff.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll open it up to the floor with questions you might have. And Sam's going to bring the only working microphone.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. Hey, a lot of great commentary up there. My name's Tyler Hervey. I'm the lead payloads and sensors engineer for the Launch Effects program under Colonel Gray. I think a lot of really great comments made up there. You know, one thing that comes to mind is over the last couple of days, you know, we've heard a lot of talk about what LER, and I think that Chris put it really well. You know, he's like, hey, I came to this conference, and you know, when I saw the definition for LE, I was pretty taken aback because it's not really that intuitive, right? Because it kind of makes you think, well, if it's a missile, if it's a rocket, it must be a launched effect, you know? And so, but now that we have a little bit, you know, better understanding of what a launched effect is, right, i.e. Collaborative behaviors, autonomy, and so forth, right? I'm guessing that for you as, you know, as industry partners, you probably have a better idea sort of kind of, you know, what LER and what the demand signal is. So I guess my question is, right, is, you know, after learning more about what LER, how has that refined kind of your paradigm? Like, how are you going to kind of reimagine things at the tech level, at the engineering level? And second question is, when it comes to incentivization, right? So how do we, as an acquisitions community, right, incentivize getting your platforms to communicate with other platforms heterogeneously, right? So I think, was it Dave mentioned the autonomy problem. So how do we get, you know, how do we incentivize the vendors to ensure that your launch effect or UAS can communicate and work with and collaborate with other vendors?
Well, I think a big part of that is the T&E exercises. You know, he also brought up approved lists of who you're working with already. Talking to DevCom and AFRL, they usually have some recommendations as far as who you want to work with. So I think that's a big portion of it. I can't stress enough the T&E events. We're going to OSD Treks, Camp Atterbury. Every one of those events we go to, we always come out of the event with a new partner that we're signing an NDA for, and we're working with them. So to some extent, them getting the invite as well to an event like that is almost like, okay, they've already passed the initial quote unquote vetting, DoD's interested in their capability, and then we can realize, okay, how mature is that capability? How good of a fit or match is that capability? So I'll answer that portion of your question. I think the T&E events are huge.
Yeah, so for interoperability, I think whether it's things like MOSA, SOSA, and MOSA are helpful, or saying, you know, we want you to comply with this universal vehicle control, and like then your box is checked and you're good. Or on comms, if there's like, yeah, there's these 3 comms, we don't really care which comms we use. So if there's one you already like, then we're happy to put it on. I'm sure the comms folks would think about it differently, but it's sort of like, surface the stuff that you want and then distribute that out. It not necessarily as a requirement, but as a, this checks our box already. If somebody has something better, then that's great, and like feel free to bring it and tell us why it's better, but like these things check a box. I will say that on launched effects, you know, the way it was defined is like, it's a very particular kind of thing. When you say like the thing has to return to base, like that is a whole bunch of specific physics about VTOL landing gear, like a bunch of stuff. So when you're like, well, maybe it should, or maybe it's like, well, if that's what it needs to do, then that's a big impact. And like when we're thinking about, do we develop something for the launched effects space? First I have to think like, who's already doing it? And do we even bother competing with their truck? Because are we going to offer a significant advantage? And then also the specific requirements, how much does that burrow me down into a vehicle that's really only useful in one place? Like cruise missiles, everybody can use them. You know, launched missiles from a box, everybody can use them. Multicopters, but like this is a pretty specific thing that we're wanting. And if you already have something you like, then like keep using it.
One thing I didn't answer, you asked how could we incentivize it. So the SBIR program works pretty well when it's a directed integration as part of that. Because, you know, for some of us, hey, we got 150 people that want to integrate something on our platform. We've got to do the OML and rack and stack. And so usually the priority goes to what the customer's dictated or what's the best fit for the requirement that the customer, in this case, the Army's asking for. But, you know, to some of the early points, if you want it expedited and we can get that as part of a SBIR or STIR, then that helps out significantly.
I would also say collaborative and autonomy are not differentiators. Like everybody's collaborative and autonomous now. You're either doing it or you're planning to do it. Like one of the big things I think we haven't come to terms with is we're still talking human on the loop. And I think people haven't realized that in like a defense situation, you need a big button that says, do your best, AI, because there's no way somebody can sit there and click little bars and lines and stuff fast enough, nor can those vehicles optimize their trajectories on a true many-to-many scenario. It seems like we're waiting for a big bad thing to happen before we're actually going to talk about that in a big way. You need a autonomous, do your best button. At least we deal with a lot of sort of counter-UAS and base defense, but right now we're not ready to do that, but we should be, and other people, nobody's ready for that.
I have one more thing to add to that. So I think using flexible contracts like other transactions is really helpful too. So not pigeonholing a company. So, and I guess the reason to do that is because there's going to be components that need more work, and it should be easy for the government to apply money to those things, even if it's from another vendor. So if you're thinking about, you know, let's take any of the companies up here. We're all providing some type of sensor, and maybe there's an interface on top of that sensor that's not providing the level of detail that we need, right? We should be able to go to the government customer and say, hey, we need money to provide to this vendor to do XYZ development to change that interface to make it what we need. And it shouldn't have to be a whole contracting thing again to get that spun up. So using other things like other transactions where you can have line items for like level of complexity of engineering and stuff like that, I think is a really good approach to making sure that government can work with industry the way that industry would work with industry.
Do one more question.
Matthew Creedigan here, Terminal Autonomy. We make a lot of drones in Ukraine, fixed wings. Panel's opinion on so they talked yesterday about an open marketplace for the military to go to buy from. If you applied that to industry where, say, the U.S. government committed to buying 10 million motors of a certain variety, would that be useful to you to build mass? You could buy from that market at scale. Or jet engine.
Short answer, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's very confusing what that marketplace is right now. I think there's some like potential very good outcomes of that marketplace. It simplifies procurement and things can come from the bottom up. I was also thinking yesterday about it becoming like the pharmaceutical industry where the big primes basically sponsor good-looking people to go around and convince battalion commanders to like check the box on Amazon. Like, you know, we could end up with that sort of situation. Like, how do we avoid that? And also for companies figuring like, am I going to have to sell 5 of these things or am I going to be selling 10,000 a month? Because it's very different. You know, if I put it on the marketplace, like how that cost structure of that thing or whether I develop that thing is potentially confusing. It's one thing, I think it's good for very commodity stuff, like where it's worked well in Ukraine, you know, quadcopters or something. For FPVs, like they're all, you know, like sure, put them on, you know, compete on price and availability. Whereas some stuff where you have a specific set of, like I don't think that would probably work for launched effects like this. As far as engines in particular, I think engaging a larger industrial base to make engines because it's clearly like so many effects are using them, effects and counter effects are using them, it makes a lot of sense. Like one thing I've been encouraging, no offense to you guys, is like get the automakers involved. If you want somebody who makes precision equipment with really high volumes and knows how to do this, like Tier 1, Delphi, Bosch, like these guys know how to make this stuff. We're sort of looking at Ukraine and acting like this is just totally novel. And it's like we have these really big companies that are really good at making lots of precision equipment with very high quality, and like we should be willing to engage them on that stuff. And I think engines in particular, we should be looking at spooling up 100,000 engines a year. It doesn't, you know, of X number of sizes, and we can talk about what those sizes might be, and everybody can use them. I don't think we're going to lose out a lot on innovation there.
Okay, please thank my panel with a round of applause.
Sorry, I talked a lot.
Yeah. I know I learned a lot in our wrapping up of the lessons learned from this event. Much of what we've said and talked about on stage, I intend to roll into that, so I appreciate it. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Sam with some last announcements.
Thanks, guys.
All right, we're back. We're going to be wrapping up the rest of the day. So from here, I'll remind everybody of our contact list. If you sign up for this contact list, that allows you to share your contact information with industry partners and government folks that are in this room, and we'll be passing that out. Also, lunch on your own. Enjoy the Austin food scene. There's lots of great options a couple blocks away or right across the street. Next slide is your breakout rooms. Again, those that are new that showed up today, first floor and the 8th floor. First floor right around the kitchen, 8th floor, and there's signs directing you where to go. Like I said, navigate to where you think you best fit. The future capabilities breakout session is a carry-on from yesterday's because we figured that would be a more popular event. And then lastly, request for information. If you feel like you need us at Army Application Lab to know more information about your technology or things that we're not looking at in the launched effects space, please provide that to us. Colonel McVeigh kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier this morning when he gave his opening remarks, is that usually from these VERTEX events, we'll send out an RFP about a month or two out based on like what industry is telling us through the noise that we need to be going after in the Army. So if you didn't get a chance to connect with someone you wanted to connect with, please take the time to connect with those folks while you're here left in Austin. Like I said again, you have Barry Tishkart over here on my right. Myself, we represent our corporate ventures team. We do our best to help small businesses and companies connect with the right stakeholders, super connect you through the DoD. Please reach out to us. We have tools and resources that we can provide you. And once again, thank you for attending VERTEX. Don't forget about the breakout sessions this afternoon, and you guys have safe travels back to your destinations. Thank you, guys.